Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 326 Ravenclaw's Lack of Martial Morality. Neville never dreamed he would be the first student to get up close to the hippogriffs. He stared at the monsters, a shiver running down his spine. The boy wanted to go forward, but his legs wouldn't obey him, he couldn't move an inch. Seeing Neville's predicament, Hagrid sighed in disappointment. Had his first lesson failed so badly? Ralph glanced at Neville, then looked at Hagrid, stepping forward to help. Professor Hagrid, let me try. Oh, great, Ralph, Hagrid exclaimed. I mean, of course. Mr. Scamander. Ralph slowly walked towards the restless hippogriffs. At first glance, they looked ugly, but upon closer inspection, they were actually quite beautiful. Especially their magnificent upper body feathers and their smooth, glossy lower body fur, added a touch of mixed beauty. Ralph picked through the patterns, finally approaching a winged hippogriff with a leopard striped coat. He asked, Hagrid, what's this guy's name? This little fellow is called Pollock, Hagrid replied, untying a chain, pulling Pollock away from its companion, and removing its collar. Pollock approached Ralph step by step, staring at the boy with its narrow, dark gold eyes. Suddenly, it let out a sharp, piercing cry. All the students held their breath, as if the next second Ralph would be covered in blood and his body torn apart. Ralph didn't back down, instead, he stared into the other's sharp eyes, and suddenly, a ding sounded in his brain. A domesticated hippogriff has been detected, triggering side quest 1. Complete Pollock's maiden ride. Reward, Hippogrify, an exceptionally wide field of vision, allowing you to easily see 10 times the distance of a human's vision. Complete Pollock's 100% taming. Reward, Iron teeth and bronze fangs. Under the influence of magic, your teeth become as strong as a hippogriff's beak, easily tearing through animal hides and flesh. After a quick glance at the quest, Ralph was speechless. What the hell was this maiden ride? Was it the kind of riding he was thinking of? Ralph muttered to himself, quickly refocusing his attention on Pollock. To conquer a hippogriff, you had to start with its eyes, make eye contact, without looking away, and then bow politely. If it bowed back, then you could boldly reach out and pet it. Although it sounded strange, the process was that direct and brutal. Luff and Porco stared at each other for about 30 seconds without blinking, his eyes almost dry, before he bent slightly. Porco followed suit, bending its front knees and lowering its body, clearly bowing. The whole class applauded. Well done, Luff, Hagrid exclaimed excitedly. Now you can touch it. Hurry up and touch it. Don't keep Porco waiting. Luff walked towards the monster and reached out, stroking its soft back several times. Hello, Porco, you're so beautiful, a true beauty. Porco circled Luff once, finally lowering its head and nuzzling the boy. Hagrid, can I ride it? Luff turned and asked. This was Hagrid's precious daughter. Riding Porco required his permission. Oh, of course, if Porco doesn't resist. Be careful not to pull off its feathers, it doesn't like you doing that. Ralph gently stroked Porco's feathers, then floated up and landed on the back of the hippogriff. The boy squeezed his legs together, urging the strong hippogriff forward, then it spread its wings and flew into the sky. It climbed with all its might until it pierced through the dark clouds. At that moment, the rain stopped, revealing a golden sea of clouds. And sunlight poured down like feathers, dazzling and beautiful. The spot where it had just pierced through was like a piece of silk being pierced by a knife, leaving a slightly angled gash. The hippogriff glided through the sea of clouds, then quickly plunged down, finally crashing to the ground like a falling leaf, only to surge forward again like a steed in an instant. The man and the beast swept across the black lake, the water splashing with waves as their wings flapped. The hippogriff let out an excited cry, a long, resounding roar that trembled across the black lake and echoed above Hogwarts. Many students heard the sound and, sitting in their classrooms, couldn't help but glance out the windows. They saw Scamander riding a hippogriff, circling in the sky, soaring through the air. That's so cool, George exclaimed. Professor McGonagall, can you transform into that too? Fred asked, raising his hand. Professor McGonagall stood at the window, gazing into the distance, lost in thought. After a long while, she finally snapped out of it and said slowly, "All right, everyone, get back to yourselves. You're in 5th year now, and in a year you'll face the OWL exams. Once you're in 6th year, things will be easier. Just keep pushing." In the North Tower, Professor Trelawney was teaching a divination class. Seeing the bird outside the window, she suddenly clutched her heart with her gleaming hand and cried out, "A bad omen, a terrible omen, a terrible omen." Ralph circled Hogwarts before flying back to the paddock. The students were already locked in a silent standoff with the hippogriffs. They wanted to ride Hagrid's precious daughter too. It looked so exciting. After landing, Ralph exchanged some thoughts with Hagrid and quickly found Neville. He was hiding behind the crowd, curled up alone under a tree, his round face the color of sour milk. "Neville, why are you sitting here?" Ralph asked, sitting down beside him. "Aren't you going to make eye contact with a hippogriff?" Neville, like a frightened animal, whispered, I'm scared. Everyone is scared the first time," Ralph comforted him. "Many people backed away just now, but you stood still. Have you forgotten? That's because you are standing next to me." Neville lowered his head in pain, fighting back tears. "They all dare to go now, but I still don't. I thought that following you would change things, but 2 years have passed, and it's still the same. I'm still the weakest and most cowardly one. That's why I can't go to Gryffindor, the house my grandmother wanted me to go to, because I lack courage." "Who says you don't have courage?" Ralph interrupted. "There are too many cowardly heroes in this world, but to be as frank as you about being cowardly, that takes real courage." Ralph placed his hand on Neville's shoulder and said seriously, "You're not without courage, you just lack confidence." "Neville, do you remember saying you wanted to avenge your parents?" the boy asked in a low voice. "If Peter could escape, your enemies might escape Azkaban one day too. They're far more terrifying than hippogriffs. Would you dare look them in the eye then?" Neville fell silent. "Come on, follow me, go and make eye contact with a hippogriff," Rove urged. "You have so many classmates around you, Hagrid, and me. No one can hurt you. Trust everyone, and trust yourself." Neville nodded shakily, clearly trying to muster his courage, and followed Rove towards the hippogriff. Neville's eyes widened instantly. He wanted to slowly turn his head, but gritted his teeth and held on. "Bend down," Rove reminded him. Neville bent down, and the hippogriff quickly bent slightly. Then, like a shadow, it silently approached and licked the warm tears on Neville's face. Neville cried out, but for some reason, his sobs instantly turned into laughter. "See? It wasn't dangerous at all," Ralph chuckled. "To hell with the Gryffindor. From now on, the true line of courage belongs to Hufflepuff." At this moment, Sherry had become the second student, after Ralph, to successfully ride a hippogriff. The girl with the ponytail rode up, looking down at Ralph and laughing. "Ralph, wanna have a race?" "A race about what?" Ralph asked, looking up. "You ride your Polt, and we'll see who gets to the castle gate first," Sherry winked. "The loser has to sing a song for the winner." "Okay, you're definitely going to lose. My riding skills are unmatched." Ralph was about to go find Polt when Sherry announced, "The race begins." The girl with the ponytail smoothed her mount's feathers, and then the hippogriff took flight. Ralph cursed the Ravenclaw girl for her lack of sportsmanship, then quickly mounted Polt and chased after her. "This illness is really torturous at night. I coughed and wiped my nose all night long, and I used up a whole roll of tissues last night. But I haven't had a fever for 2 days now, so I should be getting better soon, right?" Chapter 327 Trelawney's Heavenly Eye. Hagrid's first lesson ended smoothly. At Ralph's suggestion, he also gave each student a hippogriff feather as a reward after class. Hagrid had collected many fallen feathers while raising hippogriffs, which he had piled up in the hut. Since they were useless to him and risked being used as nesting mats by the hippogriffs, he decided to use them as classroom rewards. This small gesture undoubtedly received unanimous praise from the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students, so much so that everyone was still praising Hagrid at lunch in the Great Hall. Many people originally thought Hagrid would be a strong contender for this year's most unpopular professor, but after his first lesson, his reputation was surprisingly good. It seems Snape will continue to win the most unpopular professor award. It can only be said that the students are too biased towards him. Besides Hagrid, the most discussed person was undoubtedly divination Professor Trelawney. She made a death pronouncement in Gryffindor's divination class, foreshadowing Harry's death, causing widespread panic. However, Ralph knew very well that this was Trelawney's traditional art. She would predict the death of one student each year to welcome the new class. She was clearly devising a rather novel welcoming method. Hufflepuff's divination class was in the afternoon, and after lunch, everyone eagerly left the main castle and headed towards the North Tower. They climbed the stairs, eventually reaching a small platform. There were no doors on the platform, but instead, a circular trapdoor in the ceiling. As the students arrived, the trapdoor suddenly opened, and a silver ladder descended from the sky, landing at their feet. They began to line up and slowly ascend the silver stairs, entering a strange classroom. In reality, it wasn't a classroom at all, but rather a hybrid of an attic and an old-fashioned tea house. At least 20 small, round tables were crammed into the room. Each table was surrounded by Indian-printed armchairs and bulging cushions. The classroom was very warm, the fireplace crammed full, burning oak wood and emitting a pleasant aroma. Before the fireplace sat a large armchair covered with a soft blanket, where a thin witch sat asleep, snoring loudly. Professor Trelawney, probably drunk, was clutching an empty little wine bottle. The students exchanged bewildered glances, unsure what to say. Death Eaters, liars, recently released convicts, an old man who never washed his hair, and now an alcoholic? Were there really no normal people left in Hogwarts teaching staff? Or had the school fallen so low that it couldn't attract any normal teachers? Hannah, with her two pigtails, approached and kindly whispered, "Professor Trelawney, class is starting, wake up." But Professor Trelawney didn't move, snoring loudly. "How can you wake her up with such a gentle call? Watch me." Susan went over and nudged Professor Trelawney's shoulder, but Trelawney's snoring only grew louder. Ralph stood not far away. He thought for a moment, then suddenly shouted, "Professor McGonagall, what brings you here?" Professor Trelawney shuddered as if electrocuted, instantly waking up. She quickly wiped the drool from her mouth with her sleeve, sat up straight, and tried her best to appear dignified. "Minerva. I didn't drink during working hours. I didn't. This is a potion." Professor Trelawney suddenly stopped speaking, staring suspiciously ahead. She didn't see McGonagall. Only a group of students surrounding her. "Oh, children, is something wrong, Professor? Class has been going on for 5 minutes, Ralph smiled. "You were sleeping just now." "I wasn't sleeping." Professor Trelawney put the bottle on the ground, then tugged at her shawl. "I was just dreaming." Ralph was somewhat speechless. "Is there a difference?" "Of course." Professor Trelawney straightened her back, a deep expression on her face. "Sleeping is rest, but dreaming isn't. Not rest, but it can't still be work, can it?" Ralph raised his eyebrows. "That's right, it's work, children," Professor Trelawney said seriously. "Dreams are prophecies and omens." "I was just peering into the future through a dream." The students were speechless. If they could come up with such a reason, would they also be able to sleep in class? No, peer into the future? "Then this wine?" Ralph asked again. "I just said, this isn't wine, it's a magical potion," Professor Trelawney emphasized. "It's a drug that helps me enter deeper levels of dreams. A small sip at noon, cough, a few sips, so I can see further. Of course, if no one wakes me, this drug will keep me in a dream for a long time, which is dangerous," Professor Trelawney said hoarsely. "Fortunately, I already saw you arrive here in the crystal ball and wake me up, so I was able to enter the dream peacefully." The students looked at each other, many wondering if Professor Trelawney was lying. "All right, children, sit down." Trelawney waved her hand. While the students searched for seats, Trelawney seized the opportunity to toss a bottle of wine into a flower pot, straighten her shimmering shawl, and finally retrieve a heavy necklace and beads from the shelf, redangling it around her neck. "Welcome to divination class." Professor Trelawney stood up and slowly paced the classroom. "I am Professor Trelawney. You may not have seen me before, but I have glimpsed you many times in my dreams." Professor Trelawney walked slowly, leaning against an ornate oak cane topped with a crystal ball. "You chose divination, but it is the most difficult of all magical arts." Many students laughed. They had chosen it precisely because they had heard it was the easiest. "I must warn you from the beginning," Professor Trelawney continued, "if you don't possess vision, there's very little I can teach you. In this respect, books can only take you this far." Hannah raised her hand curiously. "Professor, what is vision?" "It's the third eye, also called the second vision," Professor Trelawney said in an ethereal voice. "Only wizards who have opened their eyes can obtain this special ability. Aren't our eyes always open? Susan asked. You've only opened 2 eyes. Professor Trelawney's gaze shifted from Hannah to Susan. The third eye hasn't opened, that is, the third eye, which you haven't been able to open yet. The students exchanged glances. With your 2 eyes, you can see my face, you can see this scenery outside the window, but that's all you can see. But the third eye allows you to see the past, present, and future. The third eye allows you to sight at Hogwarts and witness events happening in faraway places. The third eye allows you to explore mysteries and hidden histories. There are no lies under the third eye. Professor Trelawney paced around before settling back into her winged armchair. The students' chatter vanished, many now completely intrigued. Justin eagerly asked, Professor, how do we open our third eye? How do we obtain the third eye? That's why you're in my class, children. Professor Trelawney smiled with satisfaction. I will do my best to help you break free of your shackles. Sorry for the late update. I'll try to maintain 2 updates a day starting today. Chapter 328 Trelawney's Prophecy. The third eye is a term in the field of divination, possessed by extremely rare individuals, all of whom are renowned diviners in the history of magic. Therefore, ordinary wizards could never possess one. But Professor Trelawney seemed to claim that with her guidance, everyone could open it, everyone could become a great prophet. The young wizards were excited, as if they were reaching the pinnacle of their lives today. Professor Trelawney pressed her palms together, her voice hoarse. Of course I will teach you how to open your third eye, but that's for later. Before that, you must master various basic divination methods. Mastering them will help expand the aura surrounding you and increase your receptivity to future resonances. By the way, Trelawney suddenly said to Hannah, beware of a dark-haired man. Hannah's eyes widened in horror, trying to recall which wizard around her had dark hair. Professor Trelawney continued, this semester, I'll be teaching you how to interpret tea leaves. Next semester, we should be learning palmistry. If all goes well, after Easter, we'll be looking at the crystal ball. Of course, that's going to be difficult, because we'll all encounter misfortune, which will greatly delay our studies. The young wizards began whispering again, and the classroom buzzed with noise. Professor, what misfortune? Macmillan asked loudly. Could you tell us? So we can prepare. Yes, Justin said worriedly. Could it be a major earthquake? Something that could collapse Hogwarts Castle? Could it be a volcanic eruption? Susan guessed. I've been feeling uneasy lately. Professor, is this my third eye telling me to ask for leave and go home? Yes, I dreamt yesterday that half the Hogwarts professors died overnight. That must be an omen, right? Trelawney's lips twitched. Could these students think of the good things about Hogwarts? Why were they cursing people like this? No, children, it's not that bad or terrible, Trelawney quickly explained. Next February, there will be a severe flu outbreak that will force the class to close, and I myself will lose my voice. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. It was just a flu and losing their voice. If you were completely mute, that wouldn't be such a big deal. I think, dear, Professor Trelawney suddenly said to Rove, could you get me the teapot from the shelf? Rove nodded, stood up, took a large teapot from the shelf, and placed it on the table in front of Professor Trelawney. Professor Trelawney poured herself a cup of tea, drank it to cool off, and then placed a teacup on the table. Her voice was deep. Thank you, my dear. By the way, protect what you care about, don't let it fall into the hands of those you worry about. Ralph raised an eyebrow. Professor, could you be more direct? Of course, my poor child, but that wouldn't be good for you. Professor Trelawney's voice rose and fell. A happy, confused fool is 1,000 times, 10,000 times better than a painful, clear-headed wise man. You know nothing, and you'll suffer less. Damn, why did she have to say that? Now, I want you to pair up. Take a teacup from the shelf and come to me. I will pour tea into your cups. Trelawney took out some tea leaves and said in a deep voice, then sit down and drink the tea until only tea leaves are left in the cup. Swirl the tea leaves 3 times with your left hand, then turn the teacup upside down and place it on the saucer. Wait until the last drop of tea has flowed out, then give your teacup to your partner to interpret. You can use pages 5 and 6 of the book Seeing the Future Through the Fog to interpret the shape of the tea leaves. I will walk among you, helping you and guiding you. All the students stepped forward and lined up to have their tea poured. While waiting, Rove, bored, had his hunchback wrote steal Professor Trelawney's cup to observe it. However, there was only a clump of tea leaves in the cup, and he couldn't discern any pattern. After pouring their tea, Rove and Neville returned to their seats, sipped their tea according to the steps, and then exchanged teacups. Ralph strained to discern the pattern on Neville's cup, mumbling, "I see a seed, Neville. That means you'll become a herbalist. You'll succeed Professor Sprout as the professor of herbalism at Hogwarts." Neville couldn't help but laugh, staring at Ralph's cup as well. "Oh, a niffler, Ralph. That means you'll become a great magizoologist." Ralph and Neville exchanged pleasantries for a while, then exchanged cups with Hannah. The boy, in a slightly teasing voice, chuckled, "Hannah, I see a pub. That means you'll buy a pub and become its owner?" Hannah looked at Ralph in shock. "How did you know I had this dream?" "I've never told anyone," Ralph chuckled. "I have a third eye." In the original timeline, Hannah, after growing up, bought a leaky cauldron and became its owner. Hannah's words attracted the attention of many, who handed their cups to Ralph, asking him to check them. "Don't rush, one at a time," Rove teased. "I'm always pretty accurate at judging people's fortune and wealth." Professor Trelawney, who had wanted to take another nap but couldn't sleep because of the noise, got up and slowly strolled over, quickly coming to Rove's side. "Child, let me see your cup." Rove thought for a moment, picked up a cup from the table, and handed it to her. Professor Trelawney stared at the teacup, turning it counterclockwise, and everyone fell silent, watching this. My dear, this isn't a lucky teacup." "How so, Mars? You might suffer a severe burn," Trelawney continued, turning the teacup, lighting. "Your future is fraught with disaster." Everyone stared at Professor Trelawney in disbelief. She turned the teacup one last time, gasped, and then suddenly screamed. "My dear child, my poor, dear child, how I wish I were an ignorant fool. How I wish fate hadn't granted me the ability to foresee the future, so I wouldn't know your tragic fate." "What is it, Professor?" Macmillan asked immediately. Everyone stood up and slowly gathered around Ralph, straining to see the cup. "My dear," Professor Trelawney's large eyes opened dramatically, "I see a sign. This means death is behind you, and your life is in danger at any moment." Professor Trelawney's voice was as faint and gentle as the sound of waves crashing against a seashell, filled with sorrow. "Are you sure?" Ralph asked with a strange expression. "Of course." Professor Trelawney sat back down in her chair, sighing, with a clear understanding of the world's true nature. "Truth surrounds you, and your destiny is obvious. I trust your judgment." "But," Ralph smiled slightly, "Professor Trelawney, this is your cup. I just took it from your desk to do a divination for you. I didn't expect you to have already given your own final guidance on your destiny. Alice, should I speak to Mr. Filch for you and ask him to find some unused black armbands in the storeroom for your future memorial service? Happy New Year, everyone." It's the last day of the year. Chapter 329, Hybridization Experiments in Herbalism Class. Trelawney made a death prophecy about herself. This news quickly spread throughout Hogwarts after class. She usually predicted the lives of others, but this time it was her turn, a rather fair assessment, one might say. However, her fans and detractors remained silent. Her fans, of course, firmly believed in Professor Trelawney's powerful prophetic abilities, but didn't that mean she was going to die? Her detractors, especially the students whose death she had predicted, were secretly hoping for Trelawney's demise. But what if the prophecy came true? Would that prove she wasn't a fraud? For a moment, both factions were conflicted, unsure whether to hope for the prophecy's fulfillment. However, compared to Trelawney's vague death prophecy, someone nearly died in the Gryffindor and Slytherin's Care of Magical Creatures class. On their way to herbalism class, the Badgers heard from Gryffindor students returning from the paddock that Malfoy was injured. Upon further inquiry, they learned that something had happened in Hagrid's class. A hippogriff had bitten Malfoy hard. The Gryffindor students described the incident vividly, as if Malfoy was on the verge of death and ready for a feast. Standing at the greenhouse entrance, Hermione explained softly, "It's not that serious. Malfoy just injured his hand and was immediately taken to the school hospital." The girl detailed the incident, concluding, "Anyway, it's all Malfoy's fault. Hagrid said that if you insult a hippogriff, it will attack." But Malfoy didn't listen and even insulted them to their faces. "Malfoy's father certainly won't care about this," Neville said with a worried expression. "Do you think the school will expel Hagrid?" "No, they won't." Ralph shook his head. "Malfoy is no longer a member of the Board of Trustees and has no right to interfere with the teacher's decisions. With Dumbledore around, Hagrid won't be expelled. Besides, it's just a teaching accident. It's not enough to warrant expulsion. If a teaching accident resulting in student injury warranted expulsion, then Snape would be the first to be expelled." In his classes, students frequently got injured from burning or exploding cauldrons, and he used various forms of passive-aggressive tactics, yet he still managed to get away with it. Madam Hooch would have to be expelled too. Every year, several students got injured in her flying classes. But while Hagrid won't be expelled, Ralph reminded him that Hippogriff is in danger. In the original timeline, Malfoy had taken this to the Ministry of Magic, ultimately sentencing the Hippogriff to death. Just then, Professor Sprout strode across the lawn, carrying a large bunch of keys, and called out, "All right, come here, children, it's still Greenhouse 3 today." Ralph, Hermione, and Neville ended their conversation and followed Sprout toward the greenhouse. They walked along the path, past a row of tall fungi, and finally arrived at an unfamiliar area. Here, a large number of peas were planted, arranged in a staggered pattern, tall, short, and medium tall. The peas also had butterfly wing-like flowers, their colors ranging from red, purple, and pink. The peas looked beautiful, but they hadn't yet produced pods. "Does anyone know what these are?" Professor Sprout asked. Hermione, who had wanted to discuss the magical creatures class, couldn't care less now and quickly raised her hand, saying, "Bubble peas, that's right, Miss Granger." 2 points for Gryffindor. Sprout pointed to the peas and explained, "These are bubble peas, a very magical plant. Their peas bloom directly upon touching a solid object, and those flowers can be used to cure coughs. Now, can anyone tell me, which of these 3 colored peas has the best medicinal effect?" Hermione's hand shot up again. "The pink peas are the most effective. According to the research of the famous botanist Mr. Carlock, at the same dosage, they are 1.5 times more effective than the red ones and twice as effective as the purple ones." "Absolutely correct. 5 more points for Gryffindor," Professor Sprout pressed. "Then, Miss Granger, do you know why the same type of pea can produce 3 different colored flowers?" This question wasn't in the book, and Hermione was momentarily speechless. Professor Sprout looked around, but no one raised their hand to answer. Even Neville, who was best at herbology, seemed clueless. Hermione glanced at Ralph beside her and asked softly, "Do you know?" Ralph nodded. Hermione narrowed her eyes, then suddenly raised her elbow and lifted the boy's arm. "Mr. Scamander." Ralph rolled his eyes at Hermione's mischievous grin and replied, "Red flowers in peas are the dominant trait, and purple flowers are the recessive trait. When they are crossbred, the offspring will have pink peas. This phenomenon of different traits appearing in hybrid offspring is called phenotypic segregation." "Very good." Professor Sprout was somewhat surprised. She asked curiously, "Mr. Scamander, have you read Mendel's paper, Experiments in Plant Hybridization?" "No, Professor, but I've read some related books," Ralph explained. He hadn't read Mendel's paper, but having taken high school biology, he was quite familiar with this kind of thing. "Hufflepuff plus 15 points, Professor Sprout exclaimed in admiration. "I must say, for someone your age to have such a reading comprehension is truly astonishing." Professor Sprout then used a small blackboard to explain Mendel's pea hybridization experiments, but the young wizards all looked completely bewildered. Many students looked at Ralph, surprised that he even knew such obscure knowledge. It was simply unbelievable. Some students even regretted not choosing Muggle studies. However, Muggle studies obviously couldn't possibly provide this kind of knowledge. What they lacked was 9 years of compulsory education. Hermione listened to Professor Sprout's explanation while taking notes. Lacking a background in biology, she was somewhat confused by the sudden exposure to specialized terminology. "Ralph, what does this part mean?" After explaining to Hermione, Ralph asked, "Did you understand, more or less?" Hermione nodded. "Then I'll give you a simple, more advanced problem to help you deepen your understanding." Ralph picked up his quill and quickly wrote on the parchment, "Yellow round peas and green wrinkled peas are crossed to produce F1. F1 self-fertilizes to get F2. All the green round peas in F2 are then self-fertilized to get F3. Find the proportion of green round peas in F3 that can be stably inherited. Take your time." Ralph smiled. "Once you've thought it through, I have more problems here about fruit flies, red-blue blindness in males and females, and the inheritance of albinism." Chapter 330 The Noble Ralph. Students may not share the same joys and sorrows, but the pain of struggling with difficult problems is universal. Just look at Hermione, holding the problem. She scratched her head, making her already frizzy curls even more disheveled, almost as if to say, "This problem is too hard, I can't do it." Hermione is intelligent, but having only been involved in pea hybridization experiments for a few minutes and lacking any foundation, trying to jump straight into problems is indeed difficult for her. Therefore, Ralph decided to intensify the effort. The other students also looked confused, but Professor Sprout didn't expect them to understand. A general understanding was enough. They weren't doing any technically complex hybridization experiments, just simple and crude, artificial pollination. Peas are self-pollinating plants, meaning they are closed-flowered and pollinate naturally, and are generally purebred, Professor Sprout explained. To obtain hybrid pink peas, we must artificially pollinate them, which is your main task today. Professor Sprout first demonstrated the pollination process with the tools, then pointed to a corner and said, "There are the tools you need, as well as those bee suits. Be sure to wear them." Professor Sprout said, "Alright, let's get started." The young wizards immediately rushed forward, scrambling for the tools. No one wanted the most worn-out bee suit. After grabbing the tools, they began to pollinate a pea step by step. Artificial pollination is a simple task. First, the male parts of the peas are removed, including all the stamens of the immature flowers. Then, the female parts of the flowers are covered with paper bags, sealed, and when the flowers mature, pollen from the desired plant is collected and sprinkled on the stigma of the female flowers after the male parts have been removed. Of course, this works smoothly for ordinary plants, but magical plants are not so cooperative. You're trying to remove the male flower's stamens and then pollinate your own female flower with other pollen. It looks like utterly despicable netterer. Of course, the magical plants will fight back fiercely. Harry and Ron were dealing with a small bubble pea, which tried to wrap its vines around their arms, but it was too small and was quickly pinned down. Harry controlled the pea, while Ron, with a pair of tweezers, began to pluck the male flower's stamens. The bubble pea released snow-white pollen, spraying it onto Ron's mask like a shower of flowers. Ron was wearing a breathable bee suit, and the pollen seeped through the fine mesh of the mask onto his face, causing him to sneeze. "Are you alright, Ron?" Harry asked with concern. "It's nothing, just some pollen in my nose." Ron opened his mask, about to wipe the pollen off his face, when suddenly, almost unconsciously, he stuck out his tongue and licked his lips, smacking his lips. "This pollen is so sweet. Harry, like honey." "Really?" Harry grasped the bubble pea vine, hesitantly asking, "Won't there be a problem?" He remembered finding sugar beans in the pitcher plant's sap during his first year, and after eating many, he realized they were vixen droppings. Since that experience, Harry hadn't dared to eat anything indiscriminately for the past 2 years. "This time it's definitely not droppings, it's pollen." Ron confidently wiped the white pollen from his lips with his finger and held it to Harry's mouth, saying, "Try it." Clearly, Harry preferred having the bubble pea spray directly onto his hand to licking Ron's finger. It was cleaner and more hygienic. Soon, Harry's hands were covered in pollen. He licked them with his tongue and exclaimed, "Wow, it's really sweet." "Spray it again," Ron immediately said excitedly. After 2 attempts, the third pollination of the bubble pea was less than satisfactory, and the taste was much milder than before. Harry and Ron decisively abandoned it and switched to a larger pea. This behavior quickly spread to the other students, who all imitated it, pollinating the bubble peas while secretly licking the pollen. Seamus and Dean even put a bubble pea directly to their mouths, using this wild method to show off their dessert for the day. Suddenly, Harry felt something crawling up his cheek. He waved it away, but it immediately returned. "Ron, can you hear that buzzing?" Ron burped. "I think I can. Are there any more bees around here?" "Probably. This is a greenhouse, after all." Harry scratched his itchy cheek, then realized, no wonder Professor Sprout told us to wear bee suits. Right, that makes sense. The two suddenly exchanged a horrified look, both seeing bees crawling on each other's faces. Ah! Bees, countless bees appeared, swarming around the students, their buzzing wings echoing in the air. Harry and Ron hurriedly pulled their masks up, but the bees, licking pollen off them, were now trapped inside the bee suits and began their frenzied stinging. Besides the bees, there were also billywig beetles that had somehow gotten in. Billywig beetles are insects native to Australia, about the size of a tiger wasp, heavy in shape, entirely blue with a bright, jade-like sheen, and with a long, thin stinger at the base of their bodies. Compared to bees, being stung by a billywig beetle causes dizziness and then the body floats up. At this moment, Justin and Macmillan, like birds, hovered in mid-air, beginning their twin orbit around the Earth. Rove didn't pollinate or lick the pollen, He stood quietly, and when a billowing beetle approached, his hand darted out like a snake, grabbing it. Rove held the beetle in his hand, letting it buzz wildly, then took out some medicine, applied it to its abdomen, and only after doing all this did he open his hand, letting them fly away. Hermione, forgetting about pollination, stood by and observed for a moment before asking curiously, "Rolf, what are you doing?" "I'm using a marking potion to mark the billowing bugs," Rolf explained softly. "Once these spy bees return, I can follow the trail and find their nest. The billowing bug is a treasure trove. Its stinger can be used to make potions, and its honey is many times sweeter than ordinary honey, a raw material for spiky honey candy, and extremely expensive." Of course, these weren't Rolf's main reasons for capturing them. Billowing bugs are dangerous. Too many stings can cause uncontrolled levitation for days. Allergic reactions can even lead to permanent levitation. Letting them fly around freely could easily result in them accidentally stinging students. Therefore, Rolf was acting out of concern for the students' safety, without any selfish motives. He is truly noble. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331 The World's #1 Rolf Blows. After her biology class, a group of students were sent to the school hospital after being stung by bees and billowing bugs. Besides herbology, during Snape's potions class, the twins threw a dung ball into the cauldron of a Slytherin student next door, causing several to be splashed with potions. And in transfiguration class, a student transformed his arm into a chicken claw but couldn't revert. It was only the first day of school, and everyone seemed to have conspired to cause as many accidents as possible, resulting in over 20 students ending up in the school hospital. Lying in the hospital, Malfoy was overjoyed. He had been feeling lonely and isolated, but unexpectedly, he had met his beloved Potter, a truly unexpected delight. He had originally planned to be discharged that night, but now that he had a bedmate, he didn't want to leave. After all, sleeping in the Slytherin common room was nothing compared to sleeping here. Malfoy planned to ambush Potter in the middle of the night, giving him a surprise. Madame Pomfrey, however, was very unhappy, repeatedly using words like incompetent, though it was unclear who she was referring to. But as I said before, it's just a minor teaching accident. It's not like a student died, so what's the big deal? At least in Sirius's eyes, it's not a big deal. On Tuesday morning, on his way to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Sirius Black bumped into a group of Hufflepuff students and teased, "Your generation of students is too delicate. When I was in school, injuries were commonplace. The worst time, over 100 people were hospitalized, and even the Minister for Magic got involved." Over 100, Hannah stared at Sirius with pale, terrified eyes. "Did the Death Eaters break into Hogwarts?" "No, not at all." Sirius smiled slightly. "That was the Quidditch final, Gryffindor vs Slytherin. Both sides committed serious fouls. 6 players were tackled off their brooms, and 4 others broke their legs. The fighting escalated, resulting in a brawl between the two houses, injuring over 100 people. Even Professor McGonagall was hospitalized afterward." "Professor Black, who won the match?" Susan asked curiously. "Slytherin won," Sirius shrugged and smiled. "Of course, Gryffindor won back the following year. James was captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team then, and his leg was broken in the final match, leading to their loss. But it was after that match that Lily's opinion of James changed for the first time. She even visited him at the school hospital, and then in 7th year, they started dating. You could say James lost a match, but won in life." Sirius described the scene with great enthusiasm, and the students listened with rapt attention. They soon arrived at the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. A group of Ravenclaw students were standing at the door, blocked by Peeves, preventing them from entering. Peeves was throwing dung balls from the ceiling, which exploded above their heads. The surrounding wizards screamed and pushed each other, all trying to get away from this troublesome place. "Peeves, you've gotten quite bold, daring to disrupt my class," Sirius Black said. Peeves was startled and nearly fell from the air. He steadied himself in time, hovering 2 meters above the ground. "Oh, it's Sirius Black. I almost didn't recognize you. The Gryffindor ghosts were saying you were back, and it's true. Yeah, long time no see, Peeves. You still love playing pranks." "It's my job," Peeves grinned, revealing a wicked smile. "When are you going back to your old ways? After you guys graduated, no one's playing pranks with me. I've been bored for years. Now, only the Weasley twins are somewhat interesting." The students looked at Sirius Black in horror. They hadn't expected him to be one of them. Sirius Black gave a nostalgic smile, shook his head, and said, "Sorry, I'm a professor now. I don't participate in such boring tricks anymore. Now get out of the way, I have class to start." "Boring tricks? You actually say Peeves' great cause is boring tricks?" Peeves' eyes widened, and he suddenly became angry, shouting, "Black, you've forgotten your original intentions and started colluding with those despicable professors." Peeves seemed very disappointed, continuously throwing his prank weapons at the ground. Professor Sirius Black sighed, took out his wand, turned to the students, and said, "I have 9 ways to deal with Peeves. Now I'll teach you the first one, a little spell. Watch carefully, this is my first lesson for you. From now on, anyone who is afraid of Peeves can't say they are my student." Sirius Black raised his wand and said, "Joutirava." Peeves suddenly swelled up, his body instantly becoming round, as if filled with gas. Then, with a loud bang, he deflated instantly, like a punctured balloon propelled by the airflow. Peeves flew through the air, spinning rapidly like a top. He slammed into the wall, bounced, fell to the ground, bounced again, and landed again, over and over. After crashing into the wall more than 10 times, Peeves hurriedly fled, muttering a string of curses and insults. The students applauded. "That was brilliant, Professor Black," Justin whispered. Sirius nodded elegantly in thanks and smiled. "Come on, let's go into the classroom." In the crowd, Ralph was treating the wounded wing of a yellow bird. His hand touched the bird's wing, and the wound melted away like ice and snow. Ralph released his grip, but the bird didn't fly away. Instead, it perched on the boy's shoulder, chirping sweetly and melodiously. Shirley took some food from her pocket and fed it to the little bird that refused to leave. She whispered, "The new professor seems much more reliable than the previous 2 defense against the dark arts teachers." "Of course," Ralph chuckled. "Sirius learned animagus in 5th grade. He's a genius, after all. How can Quirrell and Lockhart compare to him?" Shirley suddenly asked doubtfully, "If he and Professor Snape really fought, who would win?" Ralph thought about it carefully and said, "If they really fought, I'd still favor Professor Snape. At graduation, their strength might be about the same, but Sirius spent 12 years in Azkaban, and that's when the gap widened. One was imprisoned, tortured by Dementors, and his strength would decline. The other had devoted himself to studying magic at Hogwarts for over a decade, and his strength steadily increased. Even if they were evenly matched back then, they are incomparable now. That's an undeniable reality." Shirley wholeheartedly agreed. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly said, "But if a real fight broke out, even Snape and Professor Black combined probably couldn't beat you." "Shirley, that's over the top, a bit too much." Ralph couldn't help but laugh. "If someone else said that, I'd almost think it was an insult." The girl with the ponytail tilted her head, gazing intently at the boy's handsome face, and said earnestly, "But I really think so." Ralph slightly turned his head away, a smile playing on his lips. Shirley had the potential to be the world's #1 Ralph fanboy. After the students lined up to enter the classroom, they suddenly discovered that this familiar classroom had become drastically different. All the desks had disappeared. Sirius, who had just been told by Sherry that even Snape combined couldn't beat Ralph, now looked down on the group of young wizards before him. He said seriously, "I've seen your progress over the past 2 years, and I must say, terrible, terribly terrible, extremely terrible, utterly terrible, but it's not your fault. It's those 2 idiots who wasted 2 years of your time, causing your defense against the dark arts class to stagnate for far too long." A group of 3rd-year students who didn't even know the most basic disarming charm. Can you believe it? If Snape hadn't helped by teaching and imparting so much useful knowledge, Sirius couldn't imagine how weak these young wizards would be now. Sirius believed that if he summoned the top 10 wizards from his year to fight them, even if this year's students united, they could completely crush them. Of course, that was assuming Ralph wasn't included. A monstrous talent who could kill werewolves at 13 was obviously not a factor. "Your situation is terrible, but there's still a chance to make amends." Sirius Black looked around and said loudly, "Today is a practical lesson, or rather, for the next year, you'll only have practical lessons. The best way to learn something is through practice, whether it's defense against the dark arts or anything else. The principle is the same. In this defense against the dark arts course, what you'll need from now on isn't quills, but wands. Thanks to the generous donor, give me a bottle of wine and a cigarette for the donation. Chapter 332, What Sherry Fears. The first lesson was a practical exercise, meant to intensify the students' workload. The last time Lockhart did this was with a group of goblins, and then, nothing happened. Since then, Lockhart has become a great drama queen, only daring to perform plays in the classroom, and when magical creatures are needed, students always fill in. Clearly, practical lessons are a real challenge for defense against the dark arts these days. A mishap could easily intensify the professor's workload. Sirius Black brought out a large cabinet and placed it in the center of the classroom. The cabinet shook incessantly, and loud clattering sounds came from inside. Many students looked at the cabinet with fear in their eyes, as if a fire-breathing dragon was about to leap out. Don't be afraid, there's just a Boggart in the box, Sirius explained. I searched the entire school before finding this poor fellow in Mr. Filch's filing cabinet. Hearing the name Boggart, many students who had seen them before became even more frightened and involuntarily backed away. So, who can tell me what a Boggart is? The Ravenclaw students all raised their hands. Miss Lisa Dupin, a Boggart is a shape-shifting, non-existent dark creature that transcends life and death. It can transform into anything anyone fears, Dupin answered fluently. Because of this shape-shifting ability, no one knows what a Boggart looks like when it's alone. Very good, Ravenclaw gets 5 points. Sirius smiled. However, Miss Dupin, I must correct you. It's not that no one knows what a Boggart looks like when it's alone. I know some wizards who possess a kind of vision-penetrating ability. They can see what a Boggart looks like through a box, and at that time, it hasn't transformed. Ralph knew Sirius was referring to Mad-Eye Moody. His magic eye could even see through Harry's invisibility cloak. It was indeed a very magical item. Sirius paused for a moment, then continued. A Boggart can transform into anything anyone fears, which means we are not afraid of the Boggart itself, but of things we are inherently afraid of. Pointing to the constantly banging box, Sirius said softly, the best way to eliminate fear is to face it. So, can anyone tell me how to face something that terrifies you? Hannah Abbott. Hannah thought for a moment and said, maybe, we can make it less terrifying. That's right, 5 points for Hufflepuff. Sirius smiled contentedly. The best way to deal with a Boggart is to make it less terrifying, preferably comical. Everyone, please repeat after me. Comical, 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 the whole class repeated. Very good, you now know the spell to deal with the Boggarts, Sirius continued. Next, it's up to your imagination. Think about what you fear most, and imagine how you could force it into something ridiculous, and then, we'll begin. Sirius pointed his wand at the cabinet, opened the door, and a corpse fell out. It was a dark-haired man who looked like a larger version of Harry. He had a deep wound on his neck, like a gaping maw filled with dried blood, with only a few tendons connecting his head and neck. The corpse quickly transformed into a young red-haired witch, her face deathly pale, her green eyes wide open. Many students felt their breakfast churning at the sight of the two corpses. Sirius stared at James and Lily's corpses, forced a tight-lipped smile, and raised his wand, saying, hilarious, hilarious. A wedding dress appeared on Lily. A smile on her face, and her terrifying appearance vanished instantly. Who's first? Susan Bournes. Susan jogged forward, and Lily vanished, replaced by a terrifying clown with a face painted with grease paint. He raised his hand to cover his ugly face, then gently wiped it downwards, as if peeling off his entire face, revealing a bloodied and horrifying mask. Susan swallowed, seemingly frightened. Susan, hold your wand tight, don't drop it. The wand must be won with your hand, Sirius shouted. Will your hand fall? Of course not. Susan gripped her wand tightly and shouted, funny. Funny. The clown tripped and fell with a thud, curling into a ball and rolling on the ground before doing a backflip. The fall made the students burst into laughter. Very good, Hannah Abbott, your turn. Hannah stepped forward, and the clown vanished, replaced by a monstrous dog with 3 heads, 3 pairs of menacing, darting eyes, and 3 gaping maws that constantly drooled. Clearly, Hannah had secretly gone to the 4th floor restricted area in 1st grade and seen the 3-headed dog, Louis. Hilarious, Hannah exclaimed, and the 3 dog heads disappeared, turning into 3 adorable cat heads that meowed. That's brilliant, Sirius led the applause. When it was Justin's turn, the Boggart transformed into a female ghost with black hair trailing on the floor, a deathly pale face, and eerie eyes. Then, the ghost's chest swelled up at an inexplicable speed, like two giant pumpkins, eventually becoming echoed breasts, almost bursting her clothes. Even Sirius had to admire Justin's imagination and gave him an extra 10 points. Then there was Macmillan, who was afraid of endless homework. He simply set the homework ablaze, setting it ablaze in the classroom. When it was Ralph's turn, all the students held their breath, many curious about what he was afraid of. Ralph stared at the boggart, and suddenly, a ding sounded in his mind. One wild boggart detected, triggering a side quest. Treat the boggart's appearance anxiety, allowing it to recognize its true appearance. Reward spell, fear illusion, can transform into the animal's greatest fear, like a boggart. Just then, the boggart exploded with a cracking sound, transforming into a shattered black leather trunk. The trunk was destroyed, its interior empty, all the magical creatures had escaped. Ralph took a deep breath. Well, this was indeed the last thing he wanted to see. It was a disaster. He raised his wand high and said, "Hilarious." The trunk immediately closed, and countless locks appeared around it, sealing all the exits. Sherry quickly stepped forward and stood in front of the trunk. In the classroom, all the boys looked up, curious about what this usually quiet but increasingly beautiful Ravenclaw beauty was afraid of. Even Ralph was curious and couldn't help but look up. But then, something astonishing happened. Boggart suddenly transformed into Ralph. This scene caught everyone off guard. They hadn't expected Sherry's greatest fear to be Ralph. The young wizards exchanged bewildered glances, occasionally casting curious looks at Ralph. What had he done to frighten Sherry? Many male students gritted their teeth. Could this seemingly gentle guy be a beast in human form? Ralph was equally bewildered. What was there to be afraid of? Boggart, now Ralph, with a stern face and an extremely cold tone, said, "You're fired. Don't ever go into my box again." Ralph was speechless. His expression a fascinating mix of emotions. The girl with the ponytail turned pale. She took a deep breath, raised her wand, and pointed it at Boggart, saying, "Hilarious, hilarious." Ralph was still Ralph, unchanged in appearance, but this time he smiled. He pulled a large bag of galleons from his pocket and said, "Sherry, I'm giving you a raise." Ralph, in the distance, couldn't hold back and coughed violently. The girl with the ponytail turned her head away and smiled sheepishly. Chapter 333 Snape, the Cross-Dresser. Sherry quickly returned to the crowd, standing beside Ralph, head bowed and silent, like a child who had done something wrong. Ralph stared at the ponytail girl with a scrutinizing gaze, making her appear increasingly uneasy and guilty. "Am I that scary?" Ralph couldn't help but ask. "No, not scary." Sherry shook her head vigorously. "Quite the opposite. I think you're very nice." Ralph grinned, clicking his tongue. "So, Boggart shows you're most afraid of me." The ponytail girl blushed slightly, saying shyly, "It's precisely because you're so nice that I'm afraid of being fired. Raising those magical creatures with you every day is the thing I cherish most." Ralph stared blankly at Sherry, her face turning bright red, somewhat flustered. Seeing the girl's eyes and cheeks almost dripping with tears, the boy looked away, not wanting to embarrass her any longer. He smiled and said, "Surely, although I'm happy to hear you say that, I won't be giving you a raise." The girl with the ponytail rubbed her burning cheeks, tilted her head slightly, and said softly, "Then next time I encounter a boggart, I'm afraid I won't be able to handle it." "Oh, so you were waiting for me here?" Ralph reached out and gently grasped her ponytail. Shirley noticed the gazes of the surrounding students. Her face flushed, she lowered her eyes, and said in a trembling voice, "Let go. They're all watching us." Ralph quickly let go, complaining, "Why isn't get out of class over yet?" Sirius, in the distance, was speechless. "How long has class been going on, and you're already thinking about the end? And do you even know that class is in session? Or should I leave the classroom for you two alone and let us all go to the hallway for class?" For some reason, Sirius suddenly thought of James and Lily from 7th grade. They were just as annoying. Sirius Black snapped out of his daze and watched Neville walk toward the podium, trembling violently as he did so, as if he were about to be hanged. To the students' surprise, Boggart had transformed into Professor Snape. Snape approached Neville with a menacing expression, his eyes fixed intently on him. Neville recoiled in terror, speechless. "Severus, Severus, look how many students you've unknowingly harmed, what a sin." Sirius couldn't help but tease. "Don't be nervous, Neville, it's only natural to be afraid of Snape. Sometimes even I'm scared of his face." He really is quite frightening. Snape was indeed a sinner. Neville was so frightened he almost dropped his wand. He cried out, "Slippery, hilarious!" Boggart remained unchanged, still appearing as Snape, menacingly advancing toward Neville. Clearly, Neville's magic had failed. "Neville, you need to have enough willpower. If you falter in the face of these things that frighten you, they will only become stronger," Sirius encouraged loudly. "Have courage, it's just a Boggart. I don't know what to do," Neville said, almost in tears. "How about giving him a wash?" Sirius suggested. "It's been my wish for years." Neville chanted the spell again, and this time it worked. Suddenly, a large amount of foam appeared on Snape's head. The whole class was stunned at first, then burst into laughter. This was the first time they had ever seen Professor Snape wash his hair. "Great," Sirius clapped his hands. "But Snape still scares you. How about shaving his head bald?" The laughter gave Neville some courage. He raised his wand again, and after a burst of noise, a bald Snape with a shiny forehead appeared. Snape touched his forehead, looking completely bewildered, which made Sirius burst into laughter. The students laughed along, and the laughter quickly spread. Even Neville couldn't help but join in. A few more dresses and high heels. Sirius's demands were getting increasingly outrageous. He exclaimed excitedly, "Neville, let Snape try on your grandma's dress. Let him try it on." The bald Snape hadn't even taken 2 steps forward when he suddenly stumbled. It turned out he was wearing high heels and an outdated red dress. The dress, however, looked like it belonged to the 1950s. The whole class burst into laughter, tears streaming down their faces. Boggart paused, looking around in bewilderment, but surrounded by laughter, it became annoyed and scurried back into its trunk. "Very good, everyone, a wonderful lesson," Sirius said casually. "Homework, read the chapter about Boggart and write a summary, due next Monday." After class, the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students chatted excitedly before quickly leaving the classroom. After Quirrell and Lockhart, this was the first time they had experienced such a fascinating defense against the dark arts lesson. In less than half a day, news of what happened in class spread throughout Hogwarts. The story of the Boggart transforming into Snape, having him wash and shave his head, and then dressing him in women's clothing, especially went viral. This reached its climax on Wednesday night when someone suddenly offered a hefty reward for photos of Snape's legs in stockings. 100 galleons was the starting price. If there was a series, the price would increase. Hogwarts hadn't expected students with such extreme tastes, but where there's demand, there's supply. The Weasley twins were thrilled, spending their days wandering the castle, trying to find another Boggart. They promised to film him, not just in women's clothing, but also to give him the ultimate experience, and completely cure his sex addiction. Professor Snape also heard about the defense against the dark arts class, and his eyes flashed with a threatening light whenever Black's name was mentioned. Gryffindor was in trouble. They received a barrage of deductions from Snape in the first week of school. Harry, as Black's godson, was affected. In one class, Snape deducted 200 points from his grades and sentenced him to solitary confinement. Of course, Sirius immediately added them back in class and deducted 200 points from Malfoy. Malfoy, recently discharged from the hospital, was extremely aggrieved. It was the first time he'd ever been treated this way. The Gryffindor and Slytherin house grades were like a volcano, fluctuating between their daily highs and lows. And these highs and lows depended on who attended class last that day, Sirius or Snape. The Gryffindor students finally stood up straight. Previously, when Gryffindor students were maliciously penalized, Professor McGonagall wouldn't deliberately add back points. After all, she had her pride. But now Gryffindor had a shameless professor, and Sirius and Snape were directly engaged in a head-on confrontation, a perfect match, a prostitute meeting a good man. The back and forth between the two sides was quite a spectacle. Besides Gryffindor, Hufflepuff also suffered. After all, it was Neville who dressed Snape up for defense against the dark arts. The little badger dared to provoke the old viper. He was asking for trouble. So, on Friday morning in potions class, as soon as Neville stepped into the classroom, Snape approached him. Snape stood in front of Neville, looking him up over his hooked nose, then a chilling smile appeared on his lips. "Mr. Neville Longbottom, long time no see. Ready to immerse yourself in this class with me, Neville? Thanks to Doodoo Show for the donation." Chapter 334 Snape, the Troublemaker. I was so stupid, really. I only knew that in defense against the dark arts class, I was helping Professor Black fight the Boggarts, But I never imagined that Professor Snape would retaliate against me afterwards. If Neville could speak now, this would probably be what he most wanted to say. Everyone was staring at Snape, waiting for him to deduct points from Neville, whether it was which foot stepped into the classroom first, or which eye blinked first. These were all Snape's usual reasons for deducting points. But Snape was surprisingly restrained and not in a hurry. A cat playing with a mouse never bites so quickly. It takes time to torment it. As the king of torment, Snape began to explain today's lesson. In this lesson, we'll be making a potion called Shrinking Solution. After taking it, the drinker's body will shrink, or they can transform into a younger form. Snape explained the shrinking solution while casting a sinister glance at Neville. He circled the classroom, then suddenly asked in a slippery voice, "Longbottom, when making the shrinking solution, we need to peel the wrinkled figs. How do we do that?" Neville stood up tremblingly, stammering, "Professor Snape, roast the wrinkled figs over an alcohol lamp for 30 seconds, no, 20 seconds, and the skin will peel off easily." Snape seemed surprised that Neville could answer. He gave a soft hum and continued, "When adding rat bile, what if too much is added? How do we fix it? You can add a small amount of leech blood, stir well, then add." Snape stood beside Neville, his earlier fluency vanishing as he faltered. He scratched his cheek, struggling to recall the material Ralph had made him memorize a few days prior. Ralph sighed, knowing Snape would surely cause trouble for Neville, so he had helped Neville preview the textbook and prepared a dozen or so possible questions. Neville had memorized it for days, reciting it flawlessly last night, but upon seeing Snape today, he had forgotten it all. Snape stood there with his back to Ralph, so Ralph seized the opportunity to turn to Neville, opening his mouth as a silent reminder. "Oh, right, bitter melon juice," Neville immediately replied. Snape whirled around. Ralph sat expressionlessly in his chair, seemingly doing nothing. Snape ignored his little gesture, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Longbottom, you answered both questions correctly. I didn't expect you to be a potions prodigy. I need an assistant to help me deal with the hogs this class, and you're the one." Neville was utterly bewildered. Snape waved his wand, and a boar carcass flew out of the potions pantry. His lips twisted into a malicious grin. "Remember, 10 pounds of lean meat, minced, not a speck of fat on it, then 10 pounds of fat, also minced, not a speck of lean on it. Finally, 10 pounds of cartilage, finely chopped, not a speck of meat on it." Neville wanted to retort, "Are you kidding me?" but fearing a beating, he picked up his silver knife and began to dispose of the boar. "As for you," Snape turned to Ralph, then glanced at Sherry, and sneered, "the golden duo should be broken up. Swinton, you're paired with Hannah Abbott this class. Scamander, can you manage brewing potions all by yourself?" What could Ralph say? He could only sit alone before the cauldron, while Sherry reluctantly moved to Hannah's side. Snape stared at Sherry and Hannah, chuckling softly, "Before get out of class ends today, I'm going to give Scamander and Longbottom the shrinking potion you two brewed. Let's see what happens. Maybe this will encourage you two to be more careful when brewing potions." Ralph was stunned. Had Snape become so malicious now? Who was Hannah? The two idiots on par with Neville, the classic pair of brilliant strategists. Potions brewed by her were guaranteed to be amazing. Could they even drink that? Many students laughed, unable to hide their schadenfreude. Snape glanced around, coldly saying, "Don't rush. I'll also randomly select a few students to taste the potions they made. Remember, if you're careless with the ingredients, it will cause some organs of the person taking the potion to shrink, possibly permanently. So, you need to pay extra attention to your steps." Everyone exchanged horrified glances. What if certain parts of their bodies shrank permanently? They all rushed to the storage cabinet, fearing they might get bad magical ingredients that would ruin their shrinking potion. Ralph was selecting daisy root and caterpillars when Sherry quietly leaned over and whispered in the boy's ear, "What do we do?" The ponytail girl's potion-making skills were mediocre to begin with. She could manage brewing potions herself, but with Hannah around, she was completely out of control. Ralph already had a solution. He pointed to a magical ingredient in the corner and whispered, "After brewing the shrinking potion, you can add some of that to the potion, and it'll neutralize the poison." Sherry followed the boy's gaze, lowered her head slightly, and then exclaimed in realization, "Wow, you're so clever." "Of course," Ralph said smugly, "what can a little Snape do to me?" Snape appeared behind the boy at some point, holding his potions textbook, and gave both of them a hard tap on the head. "What are you two whispering about?" Why can't you talk after class? Should I make room for you two to chat on the podium? Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw, deduct 10 points. Ralph and Sherry quickly shut up, grabbed their magical materials, and returned to their seats. Snape paced back and forth in the classroom, constantly berating the students. Tell me, Miss Dussa, what has seeped into your thick skull and contaminated your brain? Did you even listen to me? All it takes is a drop of rat bile, and you too. Didn't I clearly say that adding a little leech juice would be enough? I really want to crack open your heads and see if there's anything inside besides black gooey paste. Snape's roar echoed wherever he went. As he passed Ralph's cauldron, his eyes, perched atop his hooked nose, glanced down without comment, meaning he couldn't find any fault with it. But as Snape passed Sherry and Hannah's cauldrons, he stopped again, a terrible sneer on his face. Their cauldrons were spewing orange-red sparks, and Hannah was frantically poking at the flames beneath with the tip of her wand. With Hannah making things worse, Sherry, momentarily distracted, accidentally caused problems with her potion, leaving her flustered. Snape said nothing. After all, he wasn't the one drinking the potion. He then walked over to Neville. After you've chopped the inch bones, clean the pumpkin seeds, remember to peel them, and then grind them into fine powder. You're not leaving today until you've finished. Neville looked miserable. His hands, still burning from chopping meat, were aching. As get out of class was about to end, Snape excitedly called out. All right, it's time to taste the potions. Snape pointed to Justin and Macmillan, letting them taste their potions first. Justin took a trembling sip. His body didn't change, but his head suddenly shrunk to the size of a fist, a truly frightening sight. Macmillan felt a chill run down his spine. His face was filled with terror. He couldn't feel his ammunition anymore. The ammunition had vanished. Snape's dark eyes gleamed. All right, let's see Swinton and Miss Abbott's potions. If successful, Scamander will undoubtedly shrink after drinking them, but if the potions malfunction, Sherry and Hannah's shrinking solutions were definitely faulty, because a good potion would be a bright, vibrant green, while theirs was orange-yellow and smelled like rotten eggs. No one believed it wasn't poisoned. Ralph stared at the potion, seemingly hesitant to try it. His hands trembled, and his face was filled with fear as he asked, Professor Snape, if I drink this potion, will I get extra points for Hufflepuff? Of course, Scamander, as long as you drink 2 large cups. Snape pulled out a cup and smiled. I'll give Hufflepuff 20 points. After drinking it, Scamander would definitely get diarrhea on the spot. Trading 20 points for his embarrassment was still a good deal. Ralph seemed to have made up his mind. He scooped up 2 cups of the potion and quickly poured them down his throat. He staggered, his face contorted in pain. This potion is poisonous. 20 points for Hufflepuff, Snape said readily, patiently waiting for Ralph to collapse and then have a severe bout of diarrhea. But Ralph swayed and didn't fall. He quickly drank another cup of the potion, finally clicking his tongue. It tastes really good. The Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students all applauded. This was a true warrior. Snape looked puzzled. He bent down, sniffed the potion with his hooked nose, dipped his finger in the liquid, and put it in his mouth. He quickly shouted angrily, Who stole my Dungstone? Thanks to Drifting Moonlight and Nine-Tailed Flame Fox for their generous donations. Chapter 335 Sirius Black, who is close to people with his wealth. Dungstone, also known as Bezoar, is a type of stone extracted from a cow's stomach and has extremely strong detoxifying effects. In the magical world, there's a similar universal antidote, Phoenix Tears. Of course, Dungstone's effects can't compare to Phoenix Tears, but it's a cheap, affordable alternative. Therefore, when Snape asked Ralph to take a potion brewed by Hannah, he cleverly had Sherry add Dungstone to it, preemptively neutralizing the negative effects. Ralph decided that from now on, he'd carry an antidote with him to potions class. Otherwise, having to take Neville and Hannah's potions so frequently, it was terrifying. That wouldn't be potions class, it would be poisons class. Saturday arrived quickly, and Hufflepuff held its Quidditch selections for the school year. With Captain Truman graduating, the team had many vacancies and needed fresh blood. The new captain, Cedric, organized the selections early in the morning, with veteran players also participating to ensure fairness. But as I said before, don't challenge someone's profession with your hobby, unless you're into pornography. While the college team players aren't exactly professionals, they've trained and played for years, making them several levels above the average student. Someone like Ralph, needless to say, is more than capable of playing professionally, as Charlie put it. While that might sound like mutual flattery, it's undeniable that Ralph's skills are truly impressive. He's not a kaleidoscope of offense, but he possesses solid elbowing skills, is adept with both hands, has sharp dribbling, and when he shoots, he can unleash precise and powerful shots. Ralph's skills left a deep impression on the students participating in the selection process, especially the girls. After the formalities, the boy helped Cedric organize test flights for the students. But the girls participating in the selection weren't focused on Quidditch at all. When they saw Ralph, they deliberately bumped into him, looking like they were faking an accident. A witch even pretended to fall off her broom, forcing Ralph to rescue her. With the first girl setting an example, the other girls followed suit, diving like innocent, delicate Lindae on the competition field. After rescuing over a dozen witches, Ralph couldn't stand their harassment any longer and rode his broomstick back to the Hufflepuff stands, only to find Sirius Black there. Sirius was talking to Neville, giving him psychological counseling and helping him recover from Snape's torment. Ralph walked over and asked softly, "Sirius, what brings you here?" "I'm spying for Gryffindor, checking on your house's selection process." Sirius leaned back and smiled. "But after watching for a while, all I saw was you flirting with a bunch of witches." "Don't talk nonsense," Ralph said, sitting down. "Sirius, it's really unethical of you to slander an honest man like that. Don't talk nonsense in the future, it wouldn't be good if others heard." "Who do you think you are?" Sirius grinned mischievously. "Ralph, do you have a girl you like? Who is she? Tell me quickly, let me have some fun." Ralph smiled and shook his head. "No." Sirius looked unconvinced. He'd seen it all clearly in class every day. He was practically on paid leave to follow his crush. He pointed at the boy and laughed. "Not honest at all." "Sirius, do you have someone you like?" Ralph countered. "You're this age. Why are you still single? Are your standards too high? If you're not worried now, you'll regret it later. Look at other guys, so much younger than you, they already have 3 kids." Sirius was stunned. Ralph's barrage of marriage-urging rhetoric almost drove him to depression. He never imagined that, with both his parents deceased, he'd be pressured to get married. Actually, it wasn't entirely Sirius's fault. It seemed like everyone in his class was cursed with loneliness. Sirius, Lupin, Peter, Snape, Barty Crouch Jr., all single. Not getting married meant living a few more years. Once married, you'd be gone in no time. Look at James, Neville's parents, and Lupin later on. This curse was comparable to Defense Against the Dark Arts. As for who is responsible, it was probably some single person who couldn't have the one they loved. "Alright, let's not talk about that anymore." Sirius changed the subject. "I have good news and bad news to tell you. Which do you want to hear first?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. "The bad news, I guess. I bought the latest Nimbus 2010 for the Gryffindor Quidditch team." Sirius beamed, beaming. "Gryffindor has new equipment this year. They're guaranteed to win." This was indeed not good news. Ralph hadn't expected it since Malfoy last year. Both houses had entered a massive spending spree. "And the good news?" "The good news is," Sirius laughed, "I ordered you a firebolt." Ralph shook his head. "No need. Firebolts are too expensive. I have my own flying broomstick." "Don't be so polite, Ralph." Sirius laughed heartily, putting his arm around the boy's shoulder. "The Black family's gold is more than I could ever spend in a lifetime. Just tell me what you want, and I'll buy it for you." Well, Sirius really was incredibly generous. Why wasn't he little Sky Lady? If he were a rich woman, Ralph would definitely have to live off her. "Speaking of which, I actually have something I'd like to ask you for a favor." Ralph thought for a moment, then suddenly said, "Do you know the Marauders map?" Sirius was taken aback. He hadn't expected Ralph to bring up the name. He nodded and said, "Of course I know it. It's a map that James and I made." The Marauders map is a magical map that displays all the information about Hogwarts. It can show the user not only every classroom, corridor, and corner of the castle, but also all the hidden secret passages and the location of every one. Sirius raised his chin, thinking, that map should be in Filch's office. When they left the school, they deliberately let Filch take it as a gift for future students. Ralph shook his head. "It's not with Filch anymore. Someone else took it." "Who took it?" "The Weasley twins." "I knew it was them." Sirius laughed. "Their pranks are just like our old days." The twins had taken the Marauders map, and Ralph couldn't very well ask them for it back. After all, it wasn't his. But the Marauders map was very useful. It could accurately identify everyone, regardless of whether they were animagus, had taken Polyjuice Potion, or used an invisibility cloak, their names would appear on the map. Sirius, I'd like you to make me another Marauders map, Ralph stated his purpose. If Peter appears on the map, we can find him immediately, Sirius Black exclaimed. That's a great idea, I'll try, but this map was made by the four of us back then, and now it's just me. It might take some effort. It's alright, you just need to guide us. I'll find someone to make the actual map. Ralph sat in the stands, watching Sherry and Hermione appear in the distance, and smiled. I also have good friends who can help. At this moment, Sirius Black fell silent. He just missed his friends a little. Sirius Black shook his head, dispelling his melancholy. He suddenly turned his head, pointed at Sherry and Hermione, and grinned. Ralph, who do you actually like? Ralph rolled his eyes and said, Get lost. Chapter 336 Saving the Great Bird Buckbeak. Sherry and Hermione came to the Quidditch pitch to find Ralph, as they had arranged to visit Hagrid that day. Hagrid hadn't been seen in the Great Hall for a week since the incident during the Magical Creatures Protection class, and rumors were circulating that he was missing. They crossed the meadow and arrived at Hagrid's cabin, where they found a hippogriff tied to the door. Its name was Buckbeak, and it was the one who had injured Malfoy. Awful sat in the doorway, barking incessantly at Buckbeak and even trying to bite its hind legs, looking quite ferocious, very much like a large dog. Sherry exclaimed in surprise, has Awful become so powerful? In her memory, Awful was very timid and always the first to run away in the face of danger. Ralph thought for a moment, then suddenly raised his wand and aimed it at the rope around Buckbeak's neck. The rope slipped from the stake, and Buckbeak expanded its range of movement, walking towards Awful, its hooves clattering on the ground. Toothpick immediately curled up on the ground, his barking turning into howling, then he wagged his tail desperately, looking utterly pathetic. Typical Toothpick. This shameful behavior earned him the unanimous contempt of Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione. Even Crookshanks in Hermione's arms gave Toothpick a disgusted look. Ralph walked to the cabin, knocked on the door, and said, Hagrid, are you home? The door opened, revealing Hagrid's large, bearded face. His eyes were red and swollen, tears streaming down his cheeks and onto the front of his leather vest. Why, you three little ones are here, come in. It was the first time any of the three had ever seen Hagrid cry like this, and they were all startled. They went inside and found Harry and Ron already sitting there. They had also come to visit Hagrid. Ralph caught a strong smell of alcohol. He sniffed and frowned. Hagrid, how much have you drunk? Ralph, I just counted, Harry whispered. 17 bottles of Flamu whiskey alone, and 4 barrels of butterbeer, all empty. Ralph, I need alcohol to numb my senses. Hagrid picked up a large, single-handled goblet, almost the size of a bucket, and chugged it down. Hagrid, the school hasn't fired you, has it? Sherry asked. But the board already knows I caused a teaching incident. Hagrid clutched his hair, groaning. They think I was too hasty and should have waited a while before letting the hippogriffs play. It's all my fault, Hagrid, don't worry, the school won't fire you, Ralph comforted him. Look at Professor Snape, he caused a teaching incident too, but he's still doing fine. That's because no one complained about Professor Snape, but Malfoy won't let me off the hook. He keeps complaining and lobbying, Hagrid sobbed, his whole body trembling. I also heard that he wants to hand Buckbeak over to the Ministry of Magic's Committee on the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, and the school's Board of Trustees is discussing the suggestion. Will the Ministry of Magic give a fair trial? Harry asked. Fair? Hagrid choked up, wiping away tears with his sleeve. Harry, you don't understand the Committee on the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. They're a bunch of cruel wizards who hate all magical creatures. Yes, I've heard it from my father too, Ron shuddered. No magical creature that goes there escapes trial, they all end up being killed. Why? Harry asked, puzzled. Rumor has it that the Committee on the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures has a long-standing partnership with some apothecaries, Ron explained. Apothecaries can't kill rare magical creatures, that would be against the law. But the Committee on the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures has the power to sentence magical creatures to death. They then sell the animal carcasses to the apothecaries, which isn't illegal. It's become a whole industry. It's like organ trafficking. There are always various channels. The people present were all hearing about this for the first time and were utterly shocked. That's right, Hagrid burst into tears, his whole body convulsing violently. It's all right that Buckbeak died from an axe, but I can't accept sending its body to the apothecary. Harry felt helpless. He asked, "What did Dumbledore say, Hagrid?" "Dumbledore has done enough for me," Hagrid groaned. "Just keeping those Dementors out of the castle is enough for him, and Peter is wandering around everywhere. I can't bother him with something like this." Harry looked at Ron again. "What about Mr. Weasley, Harry?" "My father works in the Department for the Prevention of the Misuse of Muggle Objects," Ron stammered, his pale lips barely touching the words. "He has no jurisdiction over the disposal committee, and he was suspended for a while last year because of the flying car." "Then we have no way to do anything," Harry said angrily, his face tense. This was Malfoy's fault to begin with. Shara gazed into Ron's eyes and said softly, "Ron, do you have a way?" Others might not have a way, but Ron definitely would. He could always solve all problems. This was her biggest feeling after spending several years with him. Ralph gave the girl with the ponytail a smile and said calmly, "As long as this matter isn't handed over to the Committee for the Handling of Dangerous Creatures, it's fine. Ultimately, this is a teaching accident. The Hippogriff is teaching equipment, and the Education Bureau has every right to take it over, but I don't know anyone at the Education Bureau," Hagrid said hoarsely. At this moment, all eyes were on Ralph. The girl whispered, "I know someone. Mrs. Jersilda Marchban, the head of the Education Bureau. I met her at Nico's funeral. We've been corresponding for the past year. I can have her investigate this matter." "Really?" Hagrid exclaimed excitedly. "Of course," Ralph nodded. "But Lady Jersilda Marchban won't take sides. She's fair and won't accept Malfoy's threats, but she won't believe our side of the story either. So Hagrid, you can't keep going like this. You need to focus on teaching your magical creatures class well, at least to avoid another teaching accident. Drinking is a recipe for disaster." "Yes, I think you've had enough, Hagrid. You can't touch alcohol anymore." Hermione stood up, took the large single-handled goblet off the table, went outside and poured out the wine. She then threw away the other bottles. This seemed to frighten Hagrid. He rubbed his cheeks and said, trying to pull himself together, "You're right, I can't drink anymore." He struggled to his feet, put his head in the bucket of water, and tried to sober up a bit. Ralph stood up, drawing all eyes to him. He said earnestly, "Anyway, Hagrid, you'll be listening to us from now on. Don't worry, with me here, we'll win this trial and get Buckbeak acquitted from the Ministry of Magic. Don't forget, I'm a magizoologist." Thanks to Nine-Tailed Flame Fox for the donation. Chapter 337 Aragog, Who Desires Immortality. Night fell inside the black leather trunk. Ralph sat at the table, quilling his pen as he wrote letters on parchment, one to Jersilda Marchban and the other to Minister Fudge. Both were about resolving the ownership of the Hippogriff case. Actually, Ralph didn't want to get too close to Fudge, because according to the original timeline, Fudge would eventually fall out with Dumbledore and be ousted in disgrace. Getting too close would make it harder to sabotage him later. But then he thought, since they were bound to fall out sooner or later, he should take advantage of the current good relationship to make the most of it, otherwise he wouldn't have the chance later. Power unused is power wasted. So, for such a trivial matter, Ralph went through Fudge's back door without any guilt. After finishing the letters, the young man stretched, opened the door, and saw the ponytail-wearing girl still working outside. Shirley stood amidst a cluster of hills, beside her a spider the size of a truck, its body and legs a dark gray-black, its ugly head with large pincers bearing 8 eyes. Shirley was finishing her last task of the day, changing the dressing on Aragog, the 8-eyed giant spider. Holding ointment in one hand and a wool brush in the other, she gently applied the ointment to Aragog's eyes. Aragog had been blind due to cataracts. Last year, Ralph discovered it and took it back to his box for treatment. However, Ralph's medical skills were limited, he couldn't treat such a serious illness. During his summer vacation in America, under Newt's guidance, he performed surgery on Aragog and prescribed medication. After 2 months of treatment, Aragog's previously cataract-covered eyes could now see vaguely. Ralph crept up, intending to startle Shirley from behind, but the girl already saw the boy's furtive reflection in Aragog's large eyes. Shirley pretended not to notice, and only when Ralph approached did she suddenly turn around, making a playful face. Ralph jumped back, nearly falling. Shirley laughed so hard she bent over, her lips curling into a smug smile. "Serves you right for trying to scare me on purpose," she said. Ralph patted his chest, took a breath, and then, looking at the gloating ponytail girl, couldn't help but sigh deeply. "Why are you sighing?" Shirley asked with a smile. "Other people's assistants are the kind who dive underwater and hook fish when the boss can't catch any, And look at you, you even tried to scare me. Ralph sighed seriously. I've really met the wrong person. Those kinds of assistants who dive underwater and hook fish aren't people you can hire for a few dozen gallons a month. Sherry smiled and said softly, give me more money, and I can become an all-around assistant. I can do any job. Ralph reached out and gently poked the ponytail girl's puffed-up cheek, and laughed. Really can do anything? Sherry's pretty face flushed slightly, and she hummed softly, as long as you don't go too far. But my requests are all too far-fetched. Ralph laughed. The ponytail girl glared at Ralph lightly. It was just a habitual little glare, and it had no real power. Aragog, lying to the side, also stared with somewhat dry eyes, thinking, can you finish changing its medicine first, then you can talk. It's an old, sick spider. But Aragog quickly regretted it, because it was now Ralph who changed its dressing. Ralph's movements were far less gentle than Sherry's. He directly rubbed Aragog's eyes with a brush, causing them to go from dry to painful. Aragog had witnessed Ralph's methods during this time, and fearing being treated like a gold digger, it could only vent its anger. After applying the medicine, Ralph observed it for a while and said, Aragog, your eyes are almost healed. Next time, I can send you back to the Forbidden Forest. You really won't kill me. Aragog made a clicking sound. If I wanted to kill you, I would have done it already. Why would I bother treating you? Ralph chuckled. Just the medicine you take every day, and the food and drink you've had for the past 6 months. How much money have you cost me? Aragog stared wide-eyed. It had initially thought Ralph was after its body, but it seemed that wasn't the case. It opened its mouth, wanting to speak but then stopped. What's wrong? Just say what you want to say, Ralph said, narrowing his eyes. Scamander, I know you and your grandfather are skilled in medicine. I want to know if there's any way to prolong my life. Ralph raised an eyebrow. The lifespan of an 8-eyed spider is only 40 or 50 years. Aragog sighed, his voice aged. I've lived for half a century, and I can feel my body deteriorating day by day. I've heard that wizards have a potion, brewed with the Philosopher's Stone, called the Elixir of Immortality. What are you thinking? Ralph chuckled. Even Voldemort couldn't get his hands on that stuff, and you want the Elixir of Immortality? The Elixir of Immortality? You think you're worthy of drinking it? You're dreaming. Other life-extending potions will do, Aragog pleaded. Better to live than die. Now that it could see again, it suddenly felt it could enjoy itself a little longer. What do you have to give me? Ralph countered. He had saved Aragog before because of the system reward, but there was no reward for extending its lifespan. My descendants, they only listen to me. If I die, they'll become uncontrollable. They might even kill each other, wreaking havoc throughout the Forbidden Forest. You'll find it difficult to manage them, Aragog said in a deep voice. But it's different with me. I can help you manage them, making them secrete the venom of the giant spider. That venom is extremely precious to you wizards. This was true. Obtaining venom from a live giant spider was almost impossible, hence its high price. A pint could sell for 100 gallons. If hundreds of giant spiders secreted venom simultaneously, and it were industrialized, it was unimaginable. What if I want more than just the venom? Ralph narrowed his eyes. What if I also want to kill some of your descendants? Aragog was silent for a moment, then said coldly, I gave birth to my children. Everything they have comes from me. It's time for them to give their lives for me. Ralph leaned back, scrutinizing Aragog. The 8-eyed giant spider is also a highly intelligent life form, capable of speaking human language, yet it's not categorized as a human, and there's a reason for that. After finishing tonight's treatment, Ralph led Sherry away from the box and headed towards the Ravenclaw common room. Peter could transform into a mouse, easily evading the Dementors, and then sneak into Hogwarts. It was too late to let Sherry return to the common room alone. Ralph needed to take her home. The two walked along the quiet stairs when suddenly a piercing scream echoed in the distance. Ah! If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338 Snape and Sirius Flirting. Ralph and Sherry went back down the stairs to the first floor, but the screams had stopped, and the hallway was deathly silent. Sherry held her breath, listening intently. After a moment, she whispered, I think I heard Mrs. Laura screaming. Ralph nodded slightly. He had heard it too. The sound was coming from Filch's office. He took out his wand and headed straight for a small room. Filch's office door was tightly closed, and dim light seeped through the cracks. As he got closer, Mrs. Loris's screams became clearer. Ralph had the bowtrickle open the door. He went inside, squinting as he surveyed the room. He had been to Filch's office many times before. Although the room was dark and small, it was generally tidy. But now, the office was a mess. Desks and chairs were overturned, and cabinets and drawers in the corners were ransacked, as if a thief had broken in. Filch lay on the floor, and Mrs. Loris lay beside him, meowing pitifully. Ralph walked over and touched Filch's nose. He looked up at Sherry and said, "He's not dead, just unconscious." The girl with the ponytail breathed a sigh of relief. She bent down to pick up the scattered items on the ground and examined them closely. Ralph took out a potion from his pocket and poured it into Filch's nostrils. Then he walked to Sherry and asked, "Did you find anything?" Sherry pointed to a label on the drawer and read, "Confiscated supplies, high danger." The attackers were searching these places. Ralph frowned and said, "Someone is looking for items confiscated by Filch." Just then, Filch, who had been given the potion, groaned. He opened his eyes groggily and found himself lying on the ground. He suddenly woke up and sat up. "Mr. Filch, who broke into your room and attacked you?" Rove asked. "Did you see clearly, Peter Pettigrew?" "I just came back from patrol, opened the door and saw him, rummaging through drawers and cabinets looking for something." Filch gasped for breath, his face filled with fear. "I was about to call for help when he knocked me unconscious." Peter Pettigrew. Rove narrowed his eyes, a look of suspicion on his face. What was Peter looking for in Filch's office? "Shirley, bring out a niffler." The girl with the ponytail nodded slightly. She took the black leather case from Rove, opened it, and quickly slipped inside. Rove raised his wand and said, "Trace." The wand emitted golden smoke, enveloping the entire room. It was a tracking charm, used to reveal traces of activity within a short period of time in an area. Soon, many messy footprints appeared on the ground, along with some handprints, touching cabinets, seemingly searching for something. Shirley quickly brought the niffler out. After Ralph promised a galleon, the little guy started sniffing the footprints on the ground like a police dog. The niffler sniffed around several gleaming footprints, finally locking onto Peter's scent, and ran towards the door, with Ralph and Shirley following closely behind. But they hadn't been out of the room long when a thin man with a large, hooked nose emerged from the shadows. Snape was dressed in black, with black hair, a thin face, and black eyes, like a shadow in the darkness. "Scamander, Swinton, what are you two doing here in the middle of the night?" Snape said with a malicious smile. "I think Dumbledore should do something about students dating." Sherry blushed, and Ralph cleared his throat, explaining, "Professor Snape, you misunderstand, we're looking for Peter. He just broke into Filch's office and knocked him unconscious. My niffler can smell him." "Peter shouldn't be far." Snape's black eyes widened in surprise. He drew his wand, his expression menacing, and demanded, "Where's Peter?" "Lead the way." The three of them ascended the stairs. As they passed the fourth floor, footsteps echoed down the corridor, and a faint light shone in the distance. Snape blocked Ralph and Sherry's path, raising his wand high into the distance. Another familiar figure appeared. Sirius Black approached, the light coming from an oil lamp hanging in his hand. When Sirius saw the three of them, he was momentarily stunned, then his mind instantly conjured up a whole scenario. Like Snape, he instinctively assumed that Ralph and Sherry were having a rendezvous in the castle in the middle of the night. As for Snape, he had obviously caught the poor couple during his patrol and was now taking them to Dumbledore's office. No, he had to save them. Regardless of his relationship with Ralph or his dislike for Snape, Sirius decided to intervene. "Ralph, Sherry, what are you two doing here? Didn't I tell you to go back to the house?" Sirius walked over and said, "Professor Snape, don't make things difficult for Ralph and Sherry. They've been in my office all evening, discussing defense against the dark arts. They weren't secretly dating, Ralph, Sherry." Ralph couldn't help but fassop him. What was all this about? He sighed and recounted how Peter had knocked Filch unconscious. "Peter sneaked into Hogwarts." Sirius frowned. "Then let's hurry and find him." The four of them set off. Ralph glanced at the map and noticed it formed a picture of a badger, eagle, snake, and lion. Tonight was going to be quite lively. The niffler followed the trail, finally stopping on the fifth floor. It lay down in front of a large mirror, frantically digging at the ground, kicking up clouds of dust. "There's a secret passage behind this leading to Hogsmeade Village," Sirius said, raising his wand and tapping the mirror lightly. Mirror world. The mirror immediately opened, revealing a passage large enough for a slightly thin person to enter. There's a secret passage here. Snape seemed quite surprised, a cold smile on his face as he stared at Sirius. You knew about the secret passage connecting the outside to the inside of the school, but you didn't tell me? Black, you truly are Peter's good friend. I'm starting to suspect that you helped him get in. What if I already told Dumbledore about the passage, but the headmaster didn't tell you? To prevent you from leaking it, Sirius retorted without backing down. I also suspect that you helped Peter get in. I checked this passage before, it's completely collapsed. Could it be that you helped Peter reopen it? The two simultaneously raised their wands, pointing them at each other. Enough, Ralph said impatiently. Can you two shut up and be quiet for a moment? How annoying. Still arguing at a time like this, arguing. What the hell have you become, you idiots? Snape and Sirius both looked at Ralph, momentarily stunned, seemingly frightened by him. Even Sherry was so shocked she couldn't speak for several seconds. She quietly pulled out her wand, hoping to shield the boy should Snape attack Ralph. Snape finally came to his senses, his expression dangerous. Scamander, what did you just say? He called you an idiot. Sirius whistled. A fairly accurate assessment. Shut up. Snape snapped. Insulting a professor? Hufflepuff loses 100 points. A fair assessment? Hufflepuff gains 110 points, Sirius said. The two started arguing again. Ralph ignored them, turning to Sherry. Come on, I'll take you back to the Ravenclaw common room. Aren't we going after Peter? Sherry asked. This secret passage leads to Hogsmeade. Ralph shook his head. We can't catch him tonight. Let's go. The two turned and left, the sounds of Snape and Sirius confronting each other still audible behind them. Hufflepuff loses 200 points. Hufflepuff gains 210 points. Hufflepuff loses 300 points. Shirley leaned close to Rove's ear, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper, and asked, What are they doing? Rove thought for a moment and said, Old classmates flirting. Chapter 339 Trelawney's Death Prophecy. Ralph didn't know how long Sirius and Snape had been arguing, but both of them were a little hoarse when class started on Monday. If only one of them had a problem, the young wizards would at most think it was just from teaching, but when both had problems, it was hard not to make some connections. Considering Snape and Sirius's unusual behavior on the first night of school, rumors quickly spread that the two had a private fight and had poked each other's throats until they were hoarse. As for what they used to poke, that was unclear, but in the fanfiction about the two of them circulating at Hogwarts, the weapons were all over the place, and the locations weren't limited to the office, classroom, medicine storeroom, and cauldron. Even the simplest plot would make people blush. Snape had his eye on Ralph completely. After all, Ralph was the first wizard besides the Dark Lord to dare call him an idiot to his face. Thus, Ralph officially surpassed Harry and enjoyed the supreme, Hall of Fame treatment in potions class. Tasting Neville and Hannah's poison was just an appetizer. Snape, to avoid the antidote from the Dunkstones, would even administer his own. Unfortunately, Ralph was prepared. He used smoke to extract a lot of tears from Fawkes. He took some in every class, always unharmed, making Snape question his own sanity, wondering if his poison had expired. That shouldn't be. He drugged Potter and the Wheel-Eyes in Gryffindor classes, and it always worked wonders. News of Filch's office theft quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. To avoid panic, the school didn't mention Peter Pettigrew, and students began speculating about a culprit. The Weasley twins, still searching for the Boggart, inexplicably became scapegoats. They really wanted to break into Filch's office. After all, it contained too many contraband items, a veritable ultimate fantasy world in one piece. But this time, it really wasn't them. The two were often the scapegoats. This time, they finally tasted the bitterness of being wrongly accused. As October arrived, Professor Trelawney's divination class became the most popular course at Hogwarts. Many students who hadn't chosen her class flocked to study it. It wasn't that they genuinely enjoyed divination, most were simply curious to see when Trelawney's prediction of her own death would come true. Trelawney had been practicing for 12 years, making her quite experienced, but the sheer number of students crowding into every class was truly unprecedented, a real bonus for Gryffindor from Snape. She even had the delusion that she was now famous, that her talent had been recognized by her students. After this significant shift in her self-perception, Professor Trelawney's first action was to write to Professor Dumbledore requesting a raise. She had worked diligently for 12 years, nurturing so many excellent diviners for the wizarding world, and now with so many students auditing her classes, she deserved a raise, right? Of course, this request was coldly and ruthlessly rejected by Vice Headmistress Professor McGonagall. Enraged, Professor Trelawney shifted her death prophecy from the students to Professor McGonagall in her October class. During class, Ralph and Neville were exchanging teacups, predicting each other's good fortune, when Professor Trelawney, holding her crystal ball, suddenly convulsed and let out several screams. "Here we go again," Ralph muttered. "How many times has this happened this class?" Neville, counting in his notebook, replied, "The fourth time." Trelawney averaged 4.5 convulsions, 6 screams, and 1 death prediction per class. If her predictions always came true, Hogwarts would probably be empty by now. When would they ever get to hear her real predictions for free? Ralph sighed. Hannah, standing nearby, looked at Trelawney with adoration. She and Susan were now Professor Trelawney's devoted fans. During the first class, Trelawney had warned Hannah about the dark-haired man, whom Hannah had already identified as Professor Snape. "Professor Trelawney, what did you see?" Hannah asked cautiously. "I saw a terrible future," Professor Trelawney said in the most indistinct, distant voice. "My dear, that ominous sign is striding toward the school, getting closer and closer. That thing is going to happen." "What thing, Professor?" Hannah couldn't help but ask. Professor Trelawney's large eyes opened dramatically. "A lion, a ferocious adult lion, will die a horrible death in the Gryffindor Tower before Halloween." Many students gasped. "Professor, an adult lion? You're not talking about Professor McGonagall, are you?" Susan asked. "I wish it weren't her, but..." Professor Trelawney sighed deeply, slumped into her chair, and covered her face. Justin strained his eyes, staring intently at the crystal ball. He raised his hand and said, "Professor, I see nothing." Children, looking through a crystal ball is a very delicate art. Professor Trelawney shook her head and sighed. "You haven't learned this skill yet, so of course you can't fathom the unfathomable depths of this sphere." "Professor Trelawney, when will your prediction of your own death come true?" Macmillan quickly interjected. "Oh, that matter? I told you, a healer cannot heal himself, a diviner cannot divine for himself." Professor Trelawney's voice became ethereal. "Divination for oneself results in a warning, not a true prophecy." Professor Trelawney's explanation clearly didn't convince anyone, but she said in a muffled voice, "I think we'll end the lesson here for today. Please pack your things. Oh, and remind Professor McGonagall to be very careful. What she fears will happen before Halloween." The entire class silently returned the teacups to Professor Trelawney, closed their books, packed their bags, and left the classroom. The Hufflepuff students left the North Tower and headed towards the Transfiguration classroom, arriving just before class. The Ravenclaw students had already arrived. Sherry sat in the front row, flipping through her textbook, with Rolf sitting beside her. The girl with the ponytail glanced at the strange atmosphere among the Hufflepuff students and whispered, "What happened just now in divination class?" Professor Trelawney predicted that a lion would die in the Gryffindor Tower before Halloween. Rolf shrugged. "She also hinted that it was Professor McGonagall." Sherry raised an eyebrow. She had chosen divination of arithmetic over divination class, but she had heard of Trelawney's reputation. The rest of the class kept casting furtive glances at Professor McGonagall, as if she might collapse and die at any moment. Professor McGonagall noticed the strange looks from her students and frowned. "What's wrong?" she asked. Hannah raised her hand. "Professor," she said, "we just had a divination class, and Professor Trelawney said that before Halloween." "Ah, of course," Professor McGonagall scoffed. "There's no need to go on. Miss Abbott, tell me, who did Professor Trelawney just predict would die before Halloween?" Everyone stared at Professor McGonagall. "Oh, is it my turn now?" Professor McGonagall pursed her lips and said in a mocking tone, "I don't want to speak ill of my colleagues, but I must say, divination is one of the least accurate subjects in magic. To be honest, I have the least patience for divination. Very few people can truly foresee the future, and Professor Trelawney, although Professor McGonagall didn't say the word liar, the meaning was clear. I'm more concerned about your progress in this class than my safety. Speaking of Halloween, I should remind you that the first Hogsmeade weekend is on Halloween Eve," Professor McGonagall said cheerfully. "You need to prepare your application forms in advance and hand them to your respective heads of households. Don't go to Hogsmeade without a form." So, Don't forget, Neville suddenly looked terrified and said, "Oh no, I think I've lost my form. Your grandmother sent the form directly to me, Mr. Longbottom. She thought it was safer that way." Professor McGonagall blinked. "I didn't think much of it at first, thinking you were too old for that, but now it seems your grandmother knows you better." The students all laughed. Shirley looked up at the window and gently pursed her lips. Knowing that the girl with the ponytail had returned to the convent for the summer and hadn't received a signature, Ralph comforted her. "It's okay, I can forge your headmaster's handwriting and sign your application form. Be careful Professor Flitwick doesn't find out," Shirley said in a low voice. "He doesn't even recognize your dean's handwriting," Ralph said nonchalantly. "Otherwise, I'll just sign my grandfather's name. I can imitate it perfectly. It definitely won't be considered a forgery." "Your grandfather's name?" Shirley raised an eyebrow, turning to stare at Ralph. "Mr. Scamander's your grandfather, not mine." "What's the point of him signing my application form? He could be your grandfather," Ralph chuckled. "Just a temporary substitute, he certainly won't mind." Shirley rested her elbow on the table, supporting her burning cheek, tilting her head and smiling at the boy. Professor McGonagall stood on the podium, speechless. Although she wasn't a Ravenclaw dean, she was still the vice headmaster. "Could you two at least be discreet when you're discussing signing on behalf of someone else? It's too arrogant." Chapter 340 Hermione's repeated losses at gambling. Halloween Eve arrived, and the enticing aroma of roasted pumpkin filled the Hufflepuff common room early in the morning. Despite the strong smell, the young wizards resisted the urge to go to the kitchen for breakfast. Now that they were full, what would they eat at Hogsmeade? Students like Justin, who had never been to Hogsmeade before, had been listening to Macmillan's boasts all day and were already incredibly excited. He had even skipped dinner yesterday, deliberately saving his appetite for today's adventure. Even the usually lazy Badgers arrived at the Great Hall unusually early, surprising the students from the other houses who thought they had overslept. Filch arrived quickly, standing at the door with a long parchment, checking the student list. Those wizards who hadn't signed their applications or had forged signatures, attempting to slip through the cracks, would be mercilessly exposed by his iron fist. Therefore, Sherry is in danger now, at least that's what Hermione thinks, especially as she holds Sherry's application form and stares at the crooked handwriting. Hermione tilts her head and looks at Ralph, saying, "What kind of handwriting is this? Elementary school handwriting?" "Filch will definitely find out, so what if he finds out?" Ralph shrugs, unconcerned. "At most, he'll report it to Professor Flitwick, deduct points from Ravenclaw, and put Sherry in solitary confinement." Hermione rolls her eyes, saying, "You make it sound so easy. It's not Hufflepuff's points that are deducted, nor is it your solitary confinement." She turns to the girl with the ponytail, anxiously saying, "Sherry, he's definitely trying to trick you." Hermione has been tricked by Ralph so many times, and with her strong sense of justice, she's worried that Sherry will suffer the same fate. "Hey, who's trying to scam me?" "Don't slander an honest person," Ralph said, half laughing, half crying. "How about this, Hermione, let's make a bet. I bet Filch won't find anything wrong. If I lose, I'll have Professor Flitwick take full responsibility for the punishment, and I'll pay for all your expenses at Hogsmeade today. If you lose, you pay for my expenses. How about it?" Hermione narrowed her eyes, thinking carefully. Ralph pressed on, continuing to persuade her. "Let's bet, Hermione. If I win, Sherry can go to Hogsmeade, and you'll be very happy. If I lose, you can still make a fortune off me, and I'll take the punishment, so you'll still be happy. So, you're not losing out whether you win or lose." Hermione let out a soft hum. Ralph's words seemed to make a lot of sense. Seeing that Hermione was somewhat tempted, Shirley tried to dissuade her, saying, "Hermione, don't gamble with him." Before she could finish, Ralph gently grasped her ponytail, gave her a shushing look, and said with a smile, "Shirley, don't say anything. You have to remain neutral, fair and just." The girl with the ponytail gave a no, secretly stuck out her tongue, and still subtly winked at Hermione, signaling her not to agree. Hermione silently weighed the pros and cons, carefully considering her options, when she noticed Filch had grabbed several students. Perhaps thinking Ralph was bound to lose, she nodded and said, "Let's make it clear beforehand, you're not allowed to use confusion charms or anything like that. Anyone who does is a dog." Ralph readily agreed. Soon, Filch approached, and Ralph handed him his application form, which Filch returned without even glancing at it. Ralph then handed Shirley's application form, which Filch again only glanced at briefly before returning. Hermione was completely bewildered. Just moments ago, Filch had been scrutinizing everyone else's application forms with a magnifying glass, so why was he being so lenient here? Ralph's next move shocked Hermione even more. He held up the application form, pointed to the signature, and said, "Mr. Filch, are you sure you don't want to take another look? Someone said this signature looks like a child's handwriting, that I forged it. Could you take a closer look?" "Nonsense," Filch waved his hand. "I looked very carefully, it wasn't forged." "All right, I'm going to check the next one." Hermione was dumbfounded. Could this be possible? This was definitely a fake Filch. "How did you do that?" Hermione frowned. "Not long ago, someone broke into Filch's office," Ralph explained in her low voice. "I was the one who revived him." Ralph had been providing free medical care to Mrs. Loris, and his relationship with Filch had always been decent. After reviving Filch last time, his attitude had become extremely enthusiastic. Of course, he would turn a blind eye to something as trivial as forging a signature. Hermione was annoyed. She swore this was the last time she'd bet with Ralph. She swore. Shirley comforted Hermione, while Ralph looked at Neville, who also seemed very nervous. "What's wrong, Neville?" "Hannah asked me to meet her at Hogsmeade," Neville said, troubled. "I don't know where to go with her." "Great, things have progressed this far." Ralph patted Neville on the shoulder and laughed. "I'll teach you." He began to impart his dating advice, and Neville took out a quill and wrote it down. "Never go to the Screaming Shack, it's just a dilapidated house, not haunted at all. You can take Hannah to haunted house number 8, there are quite a few real ghosts working there, and the environment is terrifying and oppressive. Hannah will definitely be so scared she'll cling to you." Neville stopped writing, frowning. "Is haunted house number 8 really that scary?" Ralph couldn't help but fathom him. If the two of them really went to the haunted house, it would probably be Neville who was scared and clung to Hannah. "After leaving the haunted house, you can go sit in Mrs. Paddock's tea house. It's full of couples, and the atmosphere is a bit ambiguous." Ralph lowered his voice and said, "Under the influence of perfume and hormones, everyone is more impulsive and can do things they wouldn't normally dare to do." Neville was quite interested in this and asked curiously, "Ralph, have you ever been to Mrs. Paddock's tea house?" "No, not at all." Ralph shook his head. "Why not?" "I have severe autism and don't like going to crowded places," Ralph said softly. Ralph did indeed dislike going to crowded places. He preferred places with fewer people, like hotels. With only 2 people, his autism wouldn't flare up. After Filch finished checking the application forms, the students boarded Thestrals and headed towards Hogsmeade. The Thestrals were fast and arrived in Hogsmeade quickly. By this time, the village had been completely transformed, with huge pumpkins hanging from the shops and bats hanging upside down. Many ghosts had also appeared in Hogsmeade, and pearly transparent figures were everywhere on the streets. "Where should we go first?" Hermione asked listlessly. "Let's go to Honeydukes first," Ralph chuckled. "Let's get breakfast sorted first." Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione walked along the road towards Honeydukes. But unexpectedly, the usually bustling Honeydukes was practically deserted, with almost no students. Chapter 341 Kidnapping Instead of Buying. Ralph pushed open the door to Honeydukes and saw Mrs. Froom, the proprietress, sitting in a chair, sighing deeply. The shop was filled with various foods, but there wasn't a single customer. It looked quite desolate. "Mrs. Froom, what's wrong?" Ralph asked curiously. "Why is nobody here?" "The Ministry of Magic said they discovered a secret passage in the shop that leads to Hogwarts," Mrs. Froom sighed. "Minister Fudge has sent a Dementor to guard the passage. Whenever there are many customers, that damned monster comes out and scares them all away." Hogwarts did indeed have a secret passage leading to Honeydukes, the entrance being behind the one-eyed witch statue. In the original timeline, this passage hadn't been discovered by the school or the Ministry of Magic. Harry had even used it to sneak into Hogsmeade. But after Sirius arrived at Hogwarts, to prevent Peter from sneaking in, he told Dumbledore about all the secret passages he knew, and naturally, the shop came under surveillance. Of course, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that there was a Dementor in the passage. Upon hearing this news, Rove became excited. He had always wanted to own a Dementor. After all, as a magizoologist, his career was incomplete without owning one. However, they always appeared in groups, making it difficult to find an opportunity to harm them. The appearance of a lone Dementor was a truly unexpected delight. As the saying goes, kidnapping is not buying, catch and adopt on the spot. That's the mindset a magizoologist should have. Besides the Dementor, Rove also saw a bounty poster for Peter on the wall. 5,000 galleons for crucial information, and 10,000 galleons for killing or capturing Peter. 10,000 galleons, that wasn't a small sum for Rove, and he was quite envious. After chatting with Mrs. Froom for a while, Rove began selecting snacks. Honeydukes' food was not only delicious but also very interesting. Sour popping candy would burn a hole in your tongue. Super bubblegum could blow bluebell-colored bubbles that would float in a room for days without bursting. Pepper Sprite would let you breathe fire after eating it. Ralph grabbed whatever he saw, like he was buying a bulk purchase, and soon the table was piled high with all sorts of pastries and snacks, like a small mountain. Mrs. Froom, who hadn't seen a single customer for half a day, was practically beaming with joy. Ralph tilted his head, gesturing for Hermione, who had lost the bet, to pay. Hermione stared blankly at the pile of snacks, took a deep breath, and rummaged through her wallet, only to find she didn't have enough money. Did it bring enough money? Ralph chuckled. You can stay and wash the dishes. Mrs. Froom, do you need a helper? Mrs. Froom found it amusing and teased, I don't need to wash the dishes, but I do need someone to stir the chocolate. Then lend me some money first, I'll pay you back later. Hermione held out her hand, her manner so self-righteous, as if she weren't borrowing money but demanding her own. Sure, Ralph said with a smirk, I'll lend you 1 galleon, you'll have to pay me back 5 galleons. Ralph wasn't engaging in usury, he was leveraging. Hermione underestimated Ralph's shamelessness. She rolled her eyes. Why don't you just rob someone? Ralph shrugged. Now I have to pay back 10 galleons. Hermione blinked, looking at Ralph with a pitiful expression, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't squeeze out a single tear. Sherry, standing to the side, suppressed a laugh and said, All right, I'll pay for Hermione. Ralph glared at her and said, Sherry, who are you on? On my side, of course. Hermione hugged Sherry, rubbing her cheek against the ponytail girl's arm affectionately. We'll team up and fight against the outsiders. Hermione raised her pointed chin and pointed at Ralph, saying, You're the outsider. We'll both fight you. Sherry smiled gently and nodded softly. That's right, sigh. Never mind, I'll pay myself. Ralph sighed. The world's going to the dogs. They don't even keep their bets anymore. I won't keep mine next time either, Hermione quickly said. Who didn't keep their bet? You didn't say Sherry couldn't pay for me. Fine, let's change the punishment, Ralph said softly. What do you want to change it to? If I need to use something of yours in the future, you can't refuse me, you have to agree, Ralph said slyly. What is it? Hermione asked warily, sensing that Ralph had some ill intentions towards her. I haven't decided yet, we'll talk about it later. Ralph took out his wallet and paid for the snacks. The three of them stayed in the shop for a while longer, and soon a group of students arrived. The Dementor, sensing the happy atmosphere, indeed came out. All the young wizards were frightened away, and Ralph, along with Sherry and Hermione, left Honeydukes. They sat in front of the post office, quickly devouring the mountain of snacks. Although it looked like a lot, the three of them ate quickly, especially Hermione, who ate with great gusto, looking as if she hadn't had a proper meal in days. Hermione picked up a honey candy between 2 fingers and put it in her mouth. She nodded vigorously. It was indeed delicious. The thought that Ralph was paying for it, and she was getting it for free, made it taste even better. Compared to Hermione's rough eating style, Sherry ate much more gracefully. She held the bag in one hand, picked up a pastry with the other, put it in her mouth, and chewed slowly and gracefully, her small mouth opening and closing slightly. After eating, the three went to Zonko's joke shop. This was a favorite spot for young wizards because it sold many prank items. The Weasley twins were maintaining order at the door. They claimed to be temporary workers, but they were actually secretly learning the techniques. Ralph bought some flashbangs and smoke bombs at Zonko's joke shop, not for pranks, but to deal with magical creatures when they entered the Forbidden Forest. After leaving Zonko's joke shop, the three headed towards the Hogshead Tavern to visit the strange old man, Aberforth. Ralph had also left some leftover Honeydukes snacks as a Halloween present for Aberforth. With a gift, getting him a free lunch was definitely not a problem. But as they passed Paddock's tea house, the three saw a group of students gathered at the entrance. Ralph, along with Sherry and Hermione, peered into the tea house from outside the crowd, and caught a glimpse of an unforgettable scene. In the tea house, a favorite spot for couples, Harry and Malfoy were locked in a tight embrace. Not only were they embracing, but they were also impatiently tearing at each other's clothes in public. Mrs. Partridge stood by, yelling, "Stop! Stop it! Stop fighting!" Chapter 342 Hermione's Secret. The news of Harry and Malfoy's brawl at Partridge Tea House had spread throughout Hogwarts even before the Halloween dinner began. Everyone knew what Partridge Tea House was. How could the two of them fight there and still claim they weren't a couple? The reason for the fight, of course, was a broken relationship. Harry, one of the parties involved, was speechless upon hearing the rumors. He didn't know what Partridge Tea House was. He had simply passed by, saw it brightly lit and bustling with people, and went in with Ron to order 2 milk teas. After finishing his milk tea, Harry even took Ron's cup and, observing the jelly and tapioca pearls, gave him a tea leaf interpretation, but everyone around them was in couples, hugging and kissing, while they were the only 2 boys sitting there awkwardly. Even Harry, oblivious as he was, sensed something was wrong. Just as they were about to leave, they bumped into Malfoy, who had brought Pansy in. Their ill-fated encounter led to a fight. Harry tried to clarify, and the rumor quickly changed. Harry was cheating on Malfoy with Ron, and Malfoy cornered him at Partridge Tea House, which led to the fight, a classic love triangle. However, the young wizard's attention was soon drawn to the Halloween dinner. Dumbledore had invited a troupe of elderly dancers to perform. However, most of the performers were the youthful faces of Professor McGonagall, Sprout, and Flitwick. It's easy to imagine just how senior this troupe was. The ghosts of Hogwarts also provided entertainment, gliding in formation through the Great Hall to reenact their own deaths. Nick Fury, nearly headless, even brought out the Louis V. Pleasure stage and stuffed his head inside. Ralph didn't see Helena, but her death wouldn't be easy to perform either, given the wound on her chest. Ralph had observed it closely several times. The wound was indeed large, white, and quite dangerous, definitely not suitable for children. The Hogwarts dinner was as lavish as ever, with all sorts of pumpkin pie, filled with lard, raw meat, char siu, mashed potatoes, red bean paste, curry paste. There was also trout wrapped in crushed almonds, a heron stuffed with figs, veal steaks with almond milk, creamy herring, and an unplucked white peacock. The peacock was roasted whole, stuffed with jujubes, crushed nuts, saffron, and peaches. This dish was severely condemned by Malfoy, not because he loved peacocks, but because the Malfoy family crest was a white peacock with its tail feathers spread. Their estate also kept many peacocks, his father Lucius's favorite pets. However, after tasting the peacock meat, Malfoy transformed his grief into appetite. He planned to go back and catch all the peacocks at home so his father could have a taste. After the dinner, led by the prefects, the Hufflepuff students returned to their common room. But instead of immediately going back to their dormitories to sleep, they stole some desserts from the kitchen and started a Halloween mask party. As the night wore on, Professor Sprout suddenly arrived. Everyone assumed she was there to tell them to go to bed, but instead, she said with a grave expression, "Now, everyone, follow me to the Great Hall." The little badgers were completely bewildered, following Professor Sprout to the Great Hall, only to find the Gryffindor students already there. Soon, the Ravenclaw and Slytherin students arrived, all looking equally confused. Dumbledore stood at the head table and said in a deep voice, "We just discovered traces of Peter in Gryffindor House. The professors and I will conduct a thorough search of the castle." Chaos erupted in the Great Hall, and Dumbledore had to raise his wand, emitting several ear-piercing firecracker explosions, before everyone finally quieted down. "For everyone's safety, you will be spending the night in the Great Hall. I have instructed the prefects to stand guard at the entrance, and the male and female student council presidents to remain in the Great Hall to oversee things. Report to me immediately if anything happens." Percy, as the male student council president, puffed out his chest with pride, the student council president's badge on his collar seeming even brighter. Professor Dumbledore paused, about to leave the Great Hall, then added, "Oh, by the way, you will need," he waved his wand, and the long table flew to the edge of the Great Hall, where hundreds of purple sleeping bags appeared on the ground. "Sleep well, good night." Professor Dumbledore led the professors out, closing the Great Hall doors behind him. A chorus of excited murmurs immediately filled the Great Hall as the Gryffindor students busily told the students of the other houses what had just happened. Ralph initially thought Peter had sneaked into Harry's dormitory, but upon inquiring, he learned that Peter had actually gone to The Weasley twins' dormitory. Ralph frowned, pondering for a moment, when Percy shouted, "Everyone, get into your sleeping bags. Quickly, no one speak." Lights out in 10 minutes, Ralph found Sherry and Hermione in the crowd. They had already helped him with his sleeping bag, and the three of them found a secluded corner, without even taking off their clothes, and crawled into their sleeping bags. Soon, all the candles went out, but the enchanted ceiling, like the sky outside, was filled with stars. By the light from the ceiling, the students were still whispering, discussing Peter. Ralph, Hermione, and Percy huddled in a corner, chatting as well. "It's terrifying." Peter managed to get into the student dormitory so quietly, Hermione said, propping her cheek with one hand, her face full of worry. "I thought those Dementors would be more useful." "Dementors don't have eyes, they can't see anything. They can only locate wizards by sensing emotions," Ralph explained. "But animal emotions are more complex, and they can't pinpoint animal tracks. Peter can turn into a mouse and easily enter Hogwarts." Shirley lay down beside Ralph, gazing at the brilliant starry sky on the ceiling, and whispered, "Then wouldn't we be able to catch him?" "It's not like there's no chance." Ralph sat up from his sleeping bag and looked at Hermione. "Hermione, where's your time turner? Do you have it with you?" "Huh?" Hermione was startled, incredulous. "How did you know I had one? You have 10 classes a day, many at the same time. Who wouldn't notice your unusual behavior?" Ralph chuckled. "Professor McGonagall went to the Department of Mysteries during the summer to apply for a time turner for you, right?" Hermione's eyes widened in astonishment. Her biggest secret had been so easily discovered by the boy. With such keen observation skills and a meticulous mind, wouldn't she be completely exposed in his presence, like being naked? Hermione was still imagining how terrifying Ralph was when the boy urged, "Quickly, lend it to me. Tonight is the best time to catch Peter. Catch him, and we'll take his head to the Ministry of Magic to exchange for 10,000 galleons, thanks to the generous donation from Dual Sword Style Muto." Chapter 343 Dumbledore's Departure. Hermione reached around her neck and quickly pulled a long, thin gold chain from under her collar. A small gold time-traveling device dangled from the bottom of the chain. "Come closer," Hermione whispered. "I'm about to take you two on a time travel trip." Ralph couldn't help but laugh. "We're only going back 2 hours, and you're talking about time travel. Anyone would think you're going back 2 centuries." Hermione, holding the gold chain, had already put it around Sherry's neck. Seeing Ralph still laughing like a fool, she urged, "Hurry up, what are you dawdling for?" So Ralph stopped dawdling and quickly positioned himself between Sherry and Hermione. To be honest, the time turner's gold chain was long enough for one person, just right for 2 heads, but with 3 people together, it was quite crowded. Their heads were almost touching. Ralph could clearly see the 2 girls' snow-white necks, their delicate collarbones with their rounded lines, and their unique fragrance. Sherry smelled better, and Ralph couldn't help but sniff. The girl with the ponytail, whose breathing had been soft, suddenly became rapid, but was quickly drowned out by the noise of the Great Hall. Hermione turned the timer twice, and the 3 of them vanished. However, no one noticed. The Great Hall was too dimly lit, and everyone was preoccupied with discussing Peter. Ralph had high expectations for the time turner, but his first use of it was quite uncomfortable. Blurry clouds and shapes flashed before his eyes, his eardrums vibrated as if something was pounding them, and he felt like he was floating in midair, experiencing a weightless sensation as if falling from a great height. Fortunately, the floating sensation disappeared after a few seconds, and he landed on solid ground again. In the distance, the chattering of students could be heard, growing louder. Ralph snapped out of his daze, immediately took out his wand, and touched Sherry and Hermione, and the 3 of them disappeared into thin air. Soon, the Gryffindor students appeared. The Halloween dinner had just ended, and they were chatting as they walked towards the common room after eating and drinking their fill. Professor McGonagall walked at the front of the group, protecting the young wizards. Only after everyone had disappeared did the 3 figures reappear. Hermione gazed down the corridor where Professor McGonagall had vanished, and couldn't help but sigh. "Professor McGonagall made me swear an oath not to tell anyone about the time turner. She even wrote letters to the Ministry of Magic, trying to get me one. She trusted me so much, and I let her down." "Hermione, you didn't break your oath. I guessed about the time turner, you didn't tell me," Ralph comforted her. "Besides, we're going to capture Peter Pettigrew, which is a good thing for the wizarding world. Even if Professor McGonagall knew, she would only approve. Furthermore, you still owe me a bet." I need to use something of yours, and you can't refuse. Ralph winked. You want to use the time turner? Hermione couldn't help but purse her lips. What else did you think it was? Ralph looked down at the time turner in his hand, softly reading the inscription. I mark every moment, but never surpass the sun. My value to you is measured by your purpose. Although Ralph didn't quite understand the meaning, it didn't stop him from exclaiming, how philosophical. When he had the ability in the future, he would also get a time turner. But a large one, and put it in his own box. That way, Ralph could control the box and travel through time. It would be even more perfect if he disguised the box as a blue police booth. What are we going to do next? Shirley asked. Go to the Gryffindor common room? No. Ralph shook his head and said, go to the headmaster's office first and find Professor Dumbledore. At times like this, it's better to rely on someone powerful than to act on your own. Dumbledore is at the school. Why not ask him for help? Led by Ralph, the three of them quickly arrived at the 8th floor, and then, through the dripping beast, went up the spiral staircase to reach the headmaster's office. Unexpectedly, the office was empty. Not even Fawkes was there. The walls were covered with portraits of the old headmasters, both male and female, all of them gently snoring in their frames. Knowing they were feigning sleep, Ralph asked, Professor Dippert, where's Dumbledore? Armando Dippert opened his eyes and said in an aged voice, Ralph, Albus just left in a hurry with Fawkes. I don't know where they went. Ralph frowned. Was Dumbledore's sudden departure from Hogwarts for some urgent matter? What are you bunch of little wizards doing here in the middle of the night? Phineas Black stroked his beard and asked in a sharp voice, Scamander, in my day, you'd be hanging in the dungeon and whipped for wandering around with two girls like this, so you're the worst reputed headmaster in Hogwarts history, Mr. Black. Ralph smiled. That's not my opinion, it's your great-great-grandson Sirius Black's. All the portraits burst into laughter. Phineas roared angrily, that unfilial brat. Going to Gryffindor is one thing, but now he's talking bad about me. I'm going back to Grimmauld Place and teach his mother a lesson. What kind of logic is that? Phineas strode away from his portrait. Ralph sat down in his chair, waved his wand, and a puff of golden smoke appeared from the tip, revealing a map of the Gryffindor common room. Professor Dumbledore isn't here, so we'll have to rely on ourselves now. Peter will be in George and Fred's dormitory in 40 minutes. Hermione couldn't help but ask, why is Peter going there? He's probably looking for the Marauders map, Ralph explained softly. It's the kind of map I told you about the other day. It was originally with Filch, but the twins took it. Sherry suddenly realized, no wonder Peter went to Filch's office to search for things that night. That's right, Ralph nodded. I'll hide in Fred's dormitory first. With my stealth abilities, Peter won't find me. I can grab him the moment he appears, Ralph pondered, but that's not safe. Peter has been on the run for many years, so he's still quite capable. Plus, he has a companion in Voldemort's help. The boy was devising a capture plan when he suddenly sensed something and abruptly turned to look out a window. Sherry and Hermione followed suit. In the distant depths of the Forbidden Forest, a dazzling white light suddenly appeared, like a shooting star, piercing the night and illuminating half the sky. Chapter 344 The Mysterious Guardian. Deep within the Forbidden Forest, the dazzling white light did not dissipate. Instead, it shot straight into the sky. The clouds drifting in the sky, at their outermost edges, began to churn rapidly, like a lotus flower that had already bloomed, transforming back into a snow-white bud. Ralph stood by the window, gazing into the distance, but the white light was so blinding that he could barely open his eyes. Hermione suddenly reached out and pulled her time turner from her collar. The golden needle at the end of the time turner's end trembled incessantly, buzzing loudly. Hermione was encountering this strange situation for the first time, and she asked, somewhat bewildered, Rover, what's going on? Rover took the warm time turner and examined it for a moment, but found nothing amiss. He then looked at the portrait of the headmaster on the wall and asked, Professors, does any of you know what's wrong with this time turner? The old headmasters were all knowledgeable, and soon a red-nosed wizard wearing a monocle said in a deep voice, I've seen this before. It's the hour reversal charm in the time turner resonating with a similar power. Child, hold down the hands, don't let it take you back to the past. Thank you, Professor Fosco. Rover readily complied, quickly pressing his thumb directly against the hands to prevent it from spinning erratically. The time turner quickly returned to calm, and the brilliant light deep in the Forbidden Forest vanished at the same time. Though silent, its power was immense. completely churning the sea of clouds in the sky. Ralph turned to look out the window, paused for a moment, and sighed. It seems Professor Dumbledore has gone to the Forbidden Forest. That wave of white light looked quite powerful. He wondered what had happened in the Forbidden Forest. So what do we do next? Sherry asked softly. Are we still going to the Gryffindor common room? Yes, Ralph nodded. Our plan remains unchanged. Capturing Peter is the most urgent matter. If Dumbledore was in the Forbidden Forest, it didn't matter whether they went or not. They wouldn't be of much help anyway. If Dumbledore wasn't in the Forbidden Forest, then they definitely couldn't go. The unknown was more terrifying, and Ralph would never put himself, Sherry, and Hermione in such unknown danger. Our plan remains the same. I'll hide in George and Fred's dorm room. You guys take the smoke bombs and block off the corridor. The boy was about to say something when Shirley suddenly pointed out the window and said in a soft voice, "Look, what's that?" Ralph looked out the window for the third time that night. His eyes widened as he saw a dazzling silver creature running through the air, speeding towards the headmaster's office. It had a long snout and its body was covered in fur. It looked like a niffler. The silver niffler leaped through the window, jumped onto the wall, touched the wall with its claws, and bounced back towards Ralph, its speed completely reduced. It landed gracefully on the ground, staring at Ralph with its large silver eyes. Hermione exclaimed, half excited and half surprised, "A Patronus!" She had consulted books and knew that the Patronus charm was a very profound spell, one that many adult wizards couldn't cast. The silver niffler landed on the ground, tilted its head, and raised its claws towards the window. "It seems to be telling us to follow it," Shirley said curiously. "Ralph, do you know whose Patronus this is?" Ralph shook his head, equally suspicious. "I've never seen a Patronus in niffler form. Dumbledore's Patronus was a phoenix, Professor McGonagall's was a cat, Snape's was a doe." Ralph carefully thought of all the wizards he knew, but none of them had a Patronus in niffler form. The boy frowned, his fingers tapping lightly together, the rhythmic tapping echoing in the headmaster's office. This Patronus was clearly telling them to follow it. The Patronus charm was a very special kind of magic. Apart from Snape, no Death Eater could use it. So, this definitely wasn't a trap summoned by Peter. Besides, Peter couldn't possibly know he was in the headmaster's office. But Ralph certainly wouldn't leave with a Patronus of unknown origin. Just as Ralph hesitated, the niffler walked to the boy's side and affectionately nuzzled his arm with its head. Ralph immediately felt a warmth, like a fireplace in winter, enveloping his entire body and making him feel cozy. Although Ralph didn't recognize this Patronus, he could sense its affection, a kind of unspoken, divine connection. Without further hesitation, he decisively said, "Looks like the plan has to be changed. We're not going to the Gryffindor common room, let's follow it." Ralph took out his flying broomstick from his box, and with Sherry and Hermione, flew directly out the window. Ralph didn't fly high, afraid of attracting the Dementor's attention, but instead schemed along the lawn towards the edge of the castle. The niffler completely disappeared after reaching the Willow of Men. Ralph landed in midair, frowning. Is it telling us to go to the Screaming Shack? The Willow of Men's branches shook wildly after sensing a wizard approaching. Ralph opened his box, and a niffler rushed forward, weaving and dodging among the branches like a mouse with maxed out agility. Approaching the willow, it placed its front paws on a knot in the trunk. The willow seemed to turn to stone, motionless, all its leaves frozen in place. The three walked towards the willow, sliding down a sloping hill to a low, secret passage. They followed a winding passage for a long time until they finally reached its end, a dusty house, wallpaper peeling from the walls, stains everywhere on the floor, broken furniture, and boarded-up windows. Then, a creaking sound came from above, as if someone was moving upstairs. Ralph made a shushing gesture and led the way, climbing a crumbling staircase. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but footprints were visible on the stairs. Holding their breath, they reached the second floor and followed the sound towards a room. There was movement behind the door, but it was closed. Ralph gripped his wand and pushed open the door. There stood a dilapidated four-poster bed, its curtains covered in dust. A small figure sat on the bed, sobbing. Hearing the door open, the person looked up in alarm, meeting the uninvited guest's gaze. Ralph, his face full of surprise, narrowed his eyes, initially stunned, then quickly smiled. "Peter Pettigrew, long time no see. I've missed you so much. Thanks to the generous donor, just love to wonder in the water for the donation. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, It means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345 Peter the Little Star's Death. Ralph wasn't lying, he truly missed Peter. Ever since Peter was rescued by the mysterious wizard, he had thought of him day and night, even using a time tamper to travel through time to find him. If this were made into an animated film, it would at least be a low-budget version of Thoughts Across Time. Peter seemed very excited upon seeing Ralph. His face was pale, he was sweating profusely, and his body trembled uncontrollably. Peter didn't know how Scamander knew he was hiding in the Shrieking Shack, but, You shouldn't be here, then where should I be? Ralph entered the room, smiling kindly. Peter, why are you alone? Where is your master? He glanced at the back of Peter's head, not seeing Voldemort's noseless face, and looked around, not seeing the baby-sized Dark Lord either. Where was Tom? Could he have already been resurrected? Is the white light in the Forbidden Forest related to Voldemort? Ralph asked again. How did you get hurt? Peter didn't answer, he simply raised his wand abruptly and shouted, Avada Kedavra. The killing curse came hurtling towards him. Ralph tilted his head, dodging the green light, and then swung his wand as well, shouting, Moonlight Slash. A silver-white disc, resembling the moon, appeared in midair. It spun rapidly, tracing an arc as it slashed towards Peter. Ralph had learned the Moonlight Slash spell from Dumbledore. The headmaster had used it last year against Lockhart, who was controlled by the Obscurial. Peter dodged the moonlight, but instead of hitting the wall, it spun rapidly in the air like a top, returning to slash at Peter's neck from behind. Peter felt the whooshing sound behind him and quickly ducked, barely avoiding the decapitating blow. But his bald head was still slashed by the sharp moonlight, leaving a bloody gash. Ignoring his bleeding head, Peter frantically chanted a spell, and a purple orb shot from the tip of his wand. The orb struck the disc, shattering it in two. Ralph extended his middle finger, tapping his wand with 2 fingers and shouting, Disperse. The shattered moon discs didn't disappear, they multiplied from 2 to 4, then from 4 to 8, lining up and hovering before the boy. He silently chanted, Go. 8 silver discs spun rapidly, shooting towards Peter at a dazzling speed. I'll fight you to the death. Peter raised his wand high, unleashing a spell. The spell exploded instantly, the scattering shockwaves filling the entire room, illuminating the Screaming Shack with a blinding white light. Peter, despite saying he was going to fight, attempted to apparate and escape. But before he could leave, a vine suddenly sprouted from the ground, spinning in circles and binding Peter's emaciated body. The vines ripped at Peter, leaving deep, bluish marks on his body. He screamed in agony, then his form began to shrink, transforming into a rat as he broke free from the vines. Landing on the ground, Peter, ignoring his agonizing fear, turned and scurried under the 4-poster bed, escaping into the corridor through a hole in the wall. But as soon as he made his move, Peter regretted it, because Sherry and Hermione were standing in the corridor. Seeing the rat appear, they simultaneously raised their wands and shouted, Obstacles. 2 invisible barriers, like walls, blocked Peter's path. He had no choice but to crawl back, but the vines had already spread through the hole, entangling him again. Ralph strode over, grabbed the rat, and squeezed hard. Peter squeaked in pain in his hand. Peter opened his mouth to bite Ralph's fingers, but the boy swung his arm, slamming him against the wall. Peter didn't turn into rat, but instead crashed into the wall, transforming back into human form, though still dazed and disoriented from the force of the fall. Peter landed on the ground, kicking up dust, his body twitching slightly, showing no sign of struggling to get up. Ralph walked over, placed a foot on Peter's forehead, stared at the dazed face, bent down, and whispered, Who is the wizard who saved you? And where is Voldemort? Peter panicked, ignoring the blood at the corner of his mouth, and pleaded in a tearful voice, Ralph, spare me, please spare me, I can't tell you, if you won't tell. I'll have to use Veritaserum. Ralph took a bottle from Sherry and tried to force the potion into Peter's mouth, but Peter kept turning his head away, refusing to cooperate. Ralph bent down and punched Peter in the stomach, the pain almost making him vomit. His body instinctively bent over, and the boy reached out and pressed down on Peter's head, slamming it hard against the ground. Peter's eyes were bloodshot, blood seeping from his nose and ears. He looked down at Rove with terror, pleading, Please, spare me. Then who spared the Potters, whom you killed? Rove asked calmly. They were only in their early 20s when they died, their child just over a year old. Peter, I really want to know, have you ever regretted it? Peter struggled to reach out, trying to hug the boy's ankle, his eyes filled with pleading and sorrow. Tears streamed down his face as he repeatedly murmured, I regret it. I know I was wrong, I really know I was wrong. Rove shook his head. You only know you're going to die, Peter, I told you, you would regret it, regret not staying in Azkaban, because then you could have saved your life. Rove said indifferently, I gave you a chance to live, but you didn't cherish it. I will personally arrange your funeral. Peter's eyes widened in terror. He wanted to curse Rove, but the words wouldn't come out, only meaningless ha-ha sounds escaping his lips. Rove asked one last time, before you die, tell me who saved you. Peter's small, watery eyes, like a mouse's, widened in fear. He trembled and said, I. Before Peter could finish, his right hand suddenly rose and moved towards his throat. It was a silver arm, tightly gripping Peter's throat. His eyes rolled upwards, his face turning purple as he cried, Save me. Rove immediately pulled out a dagger and severed the arm. Peter screamed in agony, blood gushing out. But the silver arm didn't loosen its grip, it remained, as if alive, continuing to clutch Peter's throat, lifting him into the air. Ralph raised his wand and said, Loosen your grip. The silver hand remained firmly clamped around Peter's throat. He flailed his arms and kicked, struggling to pry the silver hand away, but all in vain. A dull thud was heard as Peter's neck was crushed by the silver hand, his head hitting the ground, rolling several times, blood mingling with dust. Chapter 346 Is Peter Pettigrew still alive? Ralph picked up Peter's head and placed it next to his body, but the neck had been crushed by the silver hand, making it look extremely gruesome and bizarre no matter how it was pieced together. Sherry came over carrying the black box, wanting to help Ralph move the body inside, but she had clearly overestimated her own endurance. Just one glance at the mangled corpse was enough for Sherry to break down. She turned away, her throat tightened, and she squatted down, retching. Ralph walked to the girl with the ponytail, knelt down, and gently patted her back, while waving his wand to dissipate the surrounding stench of blood. When Sherry felt a little better, Ralph handed her a tissue, asking with concern, Are you feeling better? Sherry, trembling, took the tissue, wiped her lips, and then nodded subconsciously. Ralph joked, having dealt with so many magical creature corpses before, I thought your tolerance had improved a lot. Sherry, pale-faced, replied, Magical creature corpses and human corpses feel completely different, especially when they're so gruesome. Ralph gently stroked the ponytail girl's soft back, smiling, The first time I saw a human corpse, I was just as disheveled as you, but killing a few more dark wizards made it better. Sherry slowly stood up, staggering slightly. Ralph quickly supported her arm, then turned and smiled, Hermione, why don't you come see Peter's body? Don't you love horror movies? This is a real-life horror movie. During summer vacation, Hermione had often coaxed Ralph and Sherry to watch R-rated films with her. Standing at the edge of the corridor, Hermione quickly shook her head, I'm not going. She was barely holding back from vomiting. It was too dark to see the corpse, but the smell of blood was enough to make her feel nauseous. Ralph coaxed, Hermione, if you're not used to dead people now, are you going to get used to them on the battlefield when the wizarding wars break out? Hermione seemed to think it made sense. After a moment of internal struggle, she inexplicably walked over. She carefully walked around the horrifying pool of blood before reaching the corpse, and soon she vomited too. Ralph couldn't help but burst into laughter. Shirley rolled her eyes at the boy and quickly knelt down to gently pat Hermione's back. If anyone were to approach the shrieking shack now, smelling the blood and hearing the eerie laughter, they would probably be terrified. Ralph waved his wand, and a white cloth wrapped Peter completely, then flew into a box. After Hermione had vomited enough, the three of them followed the secret passage back to the edge of Hogwarts. Standing not far from the Whomping Willow, breathing in the fresh air, Shirley and Hermione finally recovered completely. Ralph looked up at the starry sky and said regretfully, We still haven't figured out who saved Peter. Sherry asked softly, What if we use the time turner again? No, absolutely not, Hermione quickly said. If we go back to find Peter Pettigrew again, our past selves in the Shrieking Shack will definitely see us. That's strictly forbidden. If the Ministry of Magic finds out, we'll be subject to the harshest laws and punishments. Besides, Ralph was fighting Peter at the time, he might attack us, Hermione said gravely. There have been wizards who used the time turner 4 or 5 times at once, and ended up killing themselves. What would happen if we went back in time and killed our past selves? Sherry asked curiously. Could it cause time distortion? Hermione pondered. Professor McGonagall told me that Eloise, the silent one of the Department of Mysteries, once traveled back to 1402 for 5 days. When she finally returned to the present, her body was 5 centuries older and suffered irreparable damage, eventually dying at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical injuries. Her Tuesday in the present lasted 2.5 days, while Thursday only had 4 hours left. Hermione's expression turned grave. Professor McGonagall warned me that time is one of the most important laws of the wizarding world, and those who manipulate time will be manipulated by its forces. It's definitely best not to use the time turner anymore. Even if we go back, it'll be difficult to change anything. Ralph asked in a low voice, "Did you notice the silver arm that strangled Peter? That was Voldemort's magic. In the original timeline, when Voldemort was resurrected, he needed the flesh of his servants, so Peter cut off his own arm. After his resurrection, Voldemort rewarded Peter with a silver arm. That arm possessed Voldemort's magic. If Peter showed even the slightest thought of betrayal, the arm would automatically strangle him, even if the arm were severed. We questioned Peter about the person who saved him, and if Peter tried to answer, that arm would strangle him." Ralph shook his head. "Even if we went back in time, it would be difficult to get any information from him." Ralph's eyes darkened. Peter possessed that arm. Could Voldemort have been resurrected? Just as the boy was lost in thought, Sherry suddenly pointed at the castle and exclaimed in surprise, "Why are the lights in the Great Hall on?" Ralph looked up and saw the castle brightly lit in the distance. He couldn't help but frown. Hermione glanced at her watch and exclaimed in surprise, "We've already captured Peter. He can't possibly infiltrate Gryffindor again." "Why are the lights in the Great Hall on?" Ralph said softly. "Let's go back and talk about it." The boy, carrying Sherry and Hermione, returned to the castle on a flying broomstick. As the three climbed the steps and were about to enter, they saw a group of professors emerging from the foyer. Professor McGonagall looked surprised at first, then frowned and said, "Mr. Scamander, what brings you out? Aren't you sleeping in the Great Hall?" Perhaps Mr. Scamander heard about Peter's infiltration of the Gryffindor common room and wanted to take his companions to capture him, Snape sneered. Professor McGonagall, "He's always so arrogant." Sirius stood to the side, speechless. In this situation, he couldn't even cover for Ralph. He gave Ralph a strange look, then glanced at Sherry and Hermione. This guy was really something. Last time he took Sherry out for a night out, and this time he took 2. Sirius thought to himself, even when he was so handsome, he never did something like this. Ralph narrowed his eyes and asked, "Professor McGonagall, Peter Pettigrew just infiltrated the Gryffindor common room, just a short while ago? George Weasley and Fred Weasley saw him in their dormitory." McGonagall pursed her lips, angrily saying, "Dumbledore just informed us of this. Weren't the 3 of you in the Great Hall just now?" "Where were you?" "No, this can't be." Hermione shook her head, incredulous. "Peter Pettigrew, we've already killed him." Shirley opened the black leather case, and Ralph took out Peter's head. His face still retained a vivid expression of pain, a horrifying sight even to the professors. Seeing this scene, not only McGonagall and Sirius, but even Snape, were utterly shocked. Chapter 347 Professor McGonagall's Threat. Peter Pettigrew is dead. That's an undeniable fact. The Peter killed by Ralph was definitely not an imposter using Polyjuice Potion. Both the Animagus in his rat form and the silver arm prove his identity. So, who infiltrated the Gryffindor common room at almost the same time? A lie. An absolute lie. Upon hearing the news of Peter's death, Fudge rushed to the headmaster's office and said with absolute certainty, "Arthur's 2 sons are definitely lying." "Minister," Professor McGonagall pursed her lips and said seriously, "George Weasley and Mr. Fred Weasley have both assured that they are not lying." "Of course they won't admit it," Minister Fudge sneered, "but think about it, why would Peter go to their dormitory? They had no connection. If Peter wanted to infiltrate Hogwarts, he should have gone to get revenge on Ralph." Hearing this, Ralph, who was teasing Fawkes not far away, couldn't help but look up. "Minister Fudge, thank you for your advice to Peter. Thank you to your ancestors for 18 generations." Fudge, oblivious to Ralph's greeting of the women in his household, continued his tirade. "I just heard Snape say that Arthur's 2 sons are mischievous. They must be trying to grab attention and create a big scandal. I've seen plenty of students like that, Cornell. I trust my students. Dumbledore said in a deep voice, seated in his chair. George and Fred may like to do outrageous things in their daily lives, but they would never lie about this. Fudge was speechless. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a handkerchief and mused, then it must have been too dark in the dormitory, they mistook him for someone else. Or perhaps someone used Polyjuice Potion to impersonate Peter. Yes, maybe it was that accomplice who kidnapped him. Dumbledore didn't speak, but instead rested his fingertips on his chin. Fudge continued, Albus, Peter is dead. His body is in the school hospital. You believe Arthur's son, but not Ralph. Dumbledore glanced at the boy engrossed in playing with his bird and said, Of course I believe Ralph. I just don't recommend that you announce Peter's death so hastily. Why? Albus, since you also believe Peter is dead, why don't you agree to me announcing it? Fudge said impatiently, the people are afraid, they're terrified, and they all want to know Peter's whereabouts. If they know Peter is dead, they'll feel at ease, and the Ministry of Magic will be under much less pressure. This last point was what Fudge valued most. Since Peter Pettigrew was kidnapped and his capture was delayed, many political enemies had begun attacking him, and the public had called him incompetent. Fudge desperately needed to announce this to set the record straight and quell the rumors. Of course, Albus, I know you're worried about the wizard who kidnapped him, Fudge said, his tone softening. I assure you, the Ministry of Magic won't give up the hunt. Since he's infiltrated Hogwarts, he'll definitely come back. We'll catch him. Fudge picked up his top hat and pulled it over his head. He said hastily, All right, I need to get back to the ministry right now. I need to gather the reporters and hold the press conference. What a busy night. Fudge didn't leave the office immediately. Instead, he walked towards Ralph, grabbed his hand, and said enthusiastically, Ralph, well done. You caught Peter again. It was beyond my expectations, Minister. It's not just my achievement, 2 of my friends also contributed. Ralph said softly. I remember those 2 girls. Fudge winked. You stayed with them during the summer vacation. No wonder you didn't want to come to my house. Don't worry, the 10,000 galleons bounty, I'll have it delivered tomorrow, and your order of Merlin, although I should reveal it now, it's a first class, a done deal. Fudge pulled Ralph aside and chatted enthusiastically, his way of addressing the boy changing. Before, Ralph was like a nephew, now he was practically calling him brother. Ralph, come with me to the press conference. You captured Peter, we can't do it without you, Fudge invited. Ralph shook his head, declining. Mr. Fudge, I'm a little tired tonight, I want to rest early. All right then, take care of yourself. Fudge left the office with a hint of regret, and Professor McGonagall followed him out, leaving only Ralph and Dumbledore in the room. Ralph walked to the desk, sat down, and asked softly, Professor Dumbledore, will Fudge's announcement of Peter's death cause trouble? Yes, but not much. Dumbledore nodded. Overall, it's within acceptable limits. Who do you think infiltrated George and Fred's dormitory? Ralph asked in a low voice. Is it really, as Minister Fudge suspects, Peter's companion who used Polyjuice Potion? That possibility cannot be ruled out, Dumbledore said calmly. By the way, Ralph, I just heard some interesting things from the old headmasters. The headmaster paused for a moment, then continued, they said you came to my office not long ago with Sherry and Hermione. Ralph nodded and recounted his use of the Time Turner and the Niffler Patronus. That guardian led you to the Screaming Shack. Dumbledore cracked his knuckles, narrowing his eyes. Interesting, very interesting, Ralph, I must remind you, use Miss Granger's Time Turner with caution. Don't use it as your first choice for solving problems. I know, Professor. Ralph nodded, continuing, did you just go to the Forbidden Forest? What happened there? I saw Tom and had a bit of a conflict with him, Dumbledore said gravely. Ralph, I have some guesses, but I can't tell you. I'm worried my thoughts might influence your future choices. Ralph raised an eyebrow. This was the first time Dumbledore had played a riddle game. The boy thought for a moment, then asked, is the Forbidden Forest dangerous now? If it was too dangerous, he wouldn't take Sherry there for an adventure anytime soon. Dumbledore looked at Ralph, blinked his blue eyes, and chuckled, as long as you don't take several girls into the Forbidden Forest again, there shouldn't be too much danger. By the way, Professor McGonagall is really angry this time. She told me to tell you that if you ever take Swinton and Miss Granger out on an adventure in the middle of the night again, she'll break your legs, thanks to the generous donation from Just Love to Wander. Chapter 348 The money was divided. Halloween is a holiday with a unique kind of bad luck. almost rivaling the position of defense against the dark arts professor. It might not steadily lose a professor like defense against the dark arts each year, but it always manages to come up with something new that leaves everyone speechless. The trolls of the year before last, the Chamber of Secrets last year, and this year's Peter's invasion, each year gets more outrageous than the last. The students are half asleep in their dormitories when they're dragged out of bed, told they'll be sleeping in the Great Hall tonight. They head to the Great Hall, barely lying on the hard floor, not even warming their sleeping bags, when Snape arrives again. He waves his hand and says, "Go back to your dormitories and sleep." A brief silence falls over the Great Hall, then erupts into a cacophony of noise. Even with Snape in front of them, the young wizards can't help but grumble. "Damn it, why aren't you sleeping? Are you kidding me?" Snape's lips twitch. He was just wondering why Dumbledore didn't have Professor McGonagall announce the news, but instead specifically asked him to come. Yes. Snape admitted that for a fleeting moment, he did think that Professor McGonagall had fallen out of favor and that he was going to become the deputy headmaster. But the cursing instantly brought him back to his senses. So, all the good work went to Professor McGonagall, while he did all the dirty work, huh? Dumbledore. Of course, Snape wasn't one to tolerate being insulted by students. Although he couldn't see who was cursing him in the darkness, it didn't stop him from dragging out, "Potter insulted a professor. Cry finder, deduct 20 points. Harry was stunned. He had just crawled out of his sleeping bag and had no idea what was happening, yet he was unwittingly subjected to this misfortune. Harry couldn't help but curse aloud, and Snape, with his sharp ears, deducted another 20 points. After deducting points from Harry, Snape felt a surge of relief, but also felt it wouldn't be right to leave without an explanation. So, he succinctly stated, "Peter is dead, killed by Scamander." These words caused an immediate, deathly silence in the Great Hall, which had been filled with insults. However, just a moment later, the hall erupted in noise again, as if it had exploded. But no one was cursing Snape anymore, everyone was discussing Peter and Ralph. There was only one Scamander at Hogwarts, and everyone knew Snape was referring to Ralph. Everyone frantically searched the Great Hall for him. But no one had seen him. The Great Hall was so noisy that Snape had to draw his wand, point to his throat, and say, loud. Then, his voice boomed like thunder, echoing throughout the entire Great Hall. "All right, prefects, take your students back to their common rooms immediately." Seeing that everyone was still searching for someone, Snape took the opportunity to deduct 50 points from each of the 3 houses, Badger, Eagle, and Lion, but not from Slytherin. The students then climbed out of their sleeping bags and headed to their common rooms. The little Badgers were the most eager. They all wanted to return to the Hufflepuff common room to find out what was going on with Ralph's dormitory. After all, he couldn't just disappear. Many students from other houses tried to sneak into the Hufflepuff group, but Cedric caught them one by one. But the little Badgers were destined to be disappointed. Ralph wasn't in his dormitory at all. He was still in the headmaster's office, having an in-depth conversation with Dumbledore. Of course, Ralph didn't go back to his dormitory in the end. Instead, he slept comfortably in his trunk all night, only getting up the next morning to go to the Great Hall. When he stepped into the Great Hall, it instantly fell silent, and all the students seating looked up at the young man. Ralph narrowed his eyes, his expression unchanged, and walked to the Hufflepuff table, sitting down next to Neville. Hannah waved a copy of the Daily Prophet, excitedly saying, "Ruff, you're in the newspaper again. Minister Fudge said you killed Peter Pettigrew." Ruff poured himself a glass of milk, gave a soft "oh," and nodded. "That's right." The boy's voice wasn't loud, but everyone in the quiet auditorium could hear him. "Weren't you with us in the auditorium last night?" Susan asked curiously. This was something everyone wanted to know, since the Daily Prophet hadn't gone into much detail about how Ruff killed Peter. Ruff slurped down a large gulp of milk, then put down his glass and chuckled. "I went to the restroom last night, and Peter happened to be in the next stall using the toilet. He forgot his toilet paper and was about to ask me for some, which is how I found him." Everyone clearly didn't believe this outlandish explanation and began to buzz with discussion. Ruff also glanced at the newspaper. It had Peter's picture on it, and below it was a large headline, "Peter Pettigrew escapes. Ralph Scamander, whatever, I'll handle it." The Ministry of Magic announced last night that Peter Pettigrew, the Death Eater who escaped in July, had been spotted at Hogwarts and subsequently killed by Ralph Scamander. Minister Cornelius Fudge confirmed this in an interview in his office, stating, "Thanks to Ralph's help, And of course, the Ministry of Magic also played a significant role. Although we have captured Peter, the criminals who abducted him are still at large, and the Ministry will continue its relentless pursuit. The public is urged to remain vigilant. The newspapers didn't report much, especially lacking details about Peter's murder, something all the students wanted to know. Wherever Ralph went, students harassed him, forcing him to retreat into his chest. Back in his chest, Ralph walked along the path towards a bamboo grove. Sherry was feeding the botricle in a bamboo grove when she saw the boy carrying a bag. Curious, she asked, "What's this?" "The 10,000 galleons the Ministry of Magic has on Peter's bounty," Ralph said, shaking the bag. "We split the money. Me, you, and Hermione, 3,333 galleons each. The extra galleon went to the Niffler. It burrowed under the whomping willow and pressed a scar. I think I should just forget it," Sherry said softly. "You killed Peter, Hermione provided the time-turner, and I didn't contribute much? It's not fair for me to take these galleons." Ralph flicked her smooth forehead with his finger, teasing, "Who said you didn't contribute? Moving the corpse doesn't count as contributing." "No," Sherry insisted. "Dare to talk back? I'll fire you." "Are you scared?" Rove feigned a threat. Sherry smiled softly. "No, you definitely won't find a better assistant than me, since you're so excellent. Here's your bonus for this year." Rove deliberately put on a stern face and said, "Don't refuse again." "Okay, but I have nowhere to put so many galleons." Sherry blinked and said slyly, "I'll just keep them here for now." "What about your salary savings from the past 2 years?" Rove asked. The girl with the ponytail tilted her head slightly, gazing at Rove, and raised her eyebrows, saying, "Why are you asking this? You can keep them all here with me." Rove grinned. "I'll keep them all for you." "Sure," Sherry smiled, "but I keep account of the galleons I have saved." "You're not allowed to take them secretly." Rove reached out and grasped the girl's ponytail, gently ruffling it, and laughed. "I can't guarantee that. I'll steal all your galleons and you too sooner or later." Chapter 349. A world where only the US is wounded has appeared. After Halloween, the hype surrounding Ralph's killing of Peter didn't subside. Instead, it intensified over time. The main reason was the Ministry of Magic's publicity campaign. Fudge, in his interviews, mentioned Ralph 2 out of 3 times, Dumbledore in half a sentence, and praised his own brilliant leadership in the remaining half. One might think that Ralph, having successfully captured Peter with Fudge, knew how to capitalize on the situation. The Daily Prophet was also reporting on Ralph constantly. After all, he was a darling of the media, and readers loved news about him. If Dumbledore hadn't intervened, those fast-moving Western reporters would have already stormed into Hogwarts to interview him. Students were also eagerly discussing how Ralph killed Peter, each seemingly knowing some thrilling inside story. But in reality, Ralph remained tight-lipped and revealed nothing. It wasn't that he was hiding anything or deliberately keeping everyone in suspense. Rather, the whole affair was suspicious, especially the mysterious guardian spirit. It was simply too sensitive to reveal the details. Professor Trelawney was the most excited. In her first class after Halloween, she eagerly announced to her students that the deadline she had prophesied was Peter Pettigrew. When Justin questioned her, pointing out that she had clearly mentioned Professor McGonagall, Professor Trelawney claimed she was merely warning Minerva to be wary of Peter. While Professor Trelawney's explanation seemed somewhat evasive, the deadline she had prophesied had indeed appeared. Whether it was a coincidence or not, she gained a group of loyal followers and began to refine and crystallize them. Hannah and Susan were typical examples of these crystals. They often visited Professor Trelawney's small building for private lessons during their free time. When they returned, a strange sense of superiority would appear on their faces, as if they already knew things that others didn't. In his past life, Ralph had been tricked into joining a pyramid scheme. Each time he finished being brainwashed, he believed he had grasped the secret to wealth, and he looked at others with the same expression. As mid-November approached, the weather grew increasingly cold. Hogwarts was shrouded in a gray haze, patches of ice formed on the Black Lake, and frosty leaves whispered in the students' ears. Peter's fervor finally cooled down, like the temperature, and the young wizards focused their attention on the upcoming Quidditch tournament. As the Gryffindor Quidditch team, which had started preparing earliest for this season, they were the favorites to win the Quidditch Cup. This year, it was a real challenge, not just a fantasy like in previous years. The reason was simple. Sirius Black had just upgraded their entire team with the latest Nimbus 2010 brooms. In comparison, apart from Ralph, The best brooms on the Hufflepuff team were Cedric's Nimbus 1700, and some were even using the ancient Comet 260. Even though the Nimbus company had been releasing incremental upgrades year after year, it still represented a significant generational leap. Sirius Black was so extravagant that he even replaced the Quidditch pitch with World Cup grade turf, supposedly with magical cushioning to reduce injury from falls. Professor McGonagall experienced the allure of spending money for the first time. It seemed having a wealthy and generous classmate wasn't such a bad thing after all. With even the brooms and turf replaced, there was no reason not to win, right? Professor McGonagall talked with Wood in her office for half an hour, giving him a firm order. He absolutely had to lead the team to victory this year. Wood, in a moment of impulsiveness, swore on the spot that if they didn't win this school year, the entire Gryffindor Quidditch team would remain single for life. This vow was undeniably vicious. When Wood mentioned it to Harry and the others, he almost got 3 legs broken, prematurely sealing his fate as a lifelong bachelor. Gryffindor's replacement of the Nimbus 2010 was indeed a grand gesture, but that wasn't the most surprising thing. 2 days before the Quidditch match, while the students were having lunch in the Great Hall, they saw hundreds of long-eared owls fly into the Great Hall in a grand procession. All the students looked up and saw the owls, in 2 rows, carrying 2 long, thin packages, flying towards the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff dining tables respectively. Ralph was drinking cream of chestnut soup when the owls swooped down, dropping the packages in front of him, knocking crispy hot bread and eel pie to the floor. Ralph frowned, picked up the packages, and gently tore open the wrapping paper, revealing a beautiful, gleaming flying broomstick. Macmillan, eating bacon, nearly popped his eyes out when he saw the broomstick. A charging gorgon. Is that a firebolt? I must be dreaming, it must be a firebolt. I've seen it in a Diagon Alley window. Justin swallowed hard. Such a beautiful broomstick, such graceful lines. I can't be mistaken, it was indeed a firebolt, its handle crafted from ash wood, its streamlined shape exquisitely beautiful, and at one end of the broomstick was a hand-carved gold registration number, 7. In other words, it was the 7th firebolt ever produced in the world. Rolf, did you buy this? Justin's voice trembled. He'd asked a shopkeeper in Diagon Alley about the price of firebolts, a quantity of galleons he'd never dared dream of. Justin had always assumed Rolf's family was poor, just an ordinary family, otherwise, why would they run Celia's magical creatures shop at Hogwarts to earn a little money? Now it seemed, they were truly hiding their wealth. I didn't buy it, Rolf shook his head. It's a gift from Sirius, Professor Black. Justin looked up enviously at the faculty area. What a wealthy dog. Can I touch it? Macmillan asked expectantly. Of course, Rolf nodded. Macmillan wiped his hands, but still felt greasy, so he quickly went to the washroom to wash them. When he returned, he found the entire Hufflepuff dining table surrounded by students, completely blocking Rolf's way. Everyone stood around him, admiring the firebolt up close. Just sitting there, it exuded a strong galleon scent. Not only Rolf, but Harry, Sirius's godson, also received a firebolt. Malfoy, sitting at the Slytherin table, watched this scene, his jealousy almost driving him mad. While his family could afford a firebolt, his father clearly wasn't willing to spend so much money on a useless toy for his son. After all, a single firebolt cost more than all of Slytherin's Nimbus 2001s combined. Draco, who always prided himself on his wealth, was being outdone financially for the first time. The most bewildered were the Ravenclaw Hawks. Gryffindor had Nimbus 2010, Slytherin had Nimbus 2001, even Hufflepuff had a firebolt. They were all going the pay-to-win route. While Ravenclaw had nothing but a pile of junk. Only a world where the Hawks were injured appeared. Chapter 350 The Sick Rolf and Shirley. As a professional-grade broom, the firebolt is undoubtedly the best flying broom in the world. Just how good? Rolf initially thought it might only be slightly better than his modified broom, but after actually experiencing it, he realized he was wrong, terribly wrong. Not only was its top speed twice as fast, but its acceleration was also incredibly quick, making it almost imperceptible that there was a seat underneath. His thoughts flashed by, and almost without delay, the broom moved accordingly. That silky smoothness, like milk, allowed Rolf to truly experience what it meant to be one with a broom. The firebolt was impeccable in both its software and hardware aspects. It just goes to show that some things can't be experienced through words alone, you have to ride it yourself and practice to truly appreciate its wonder. Rolf tried it out in his black box for a while, and he became increasingly addicted, streaks of light appearing across the sky. The young and powerful fire dragon Norbert was soaring through the air, preparing to bully the blind old serpent monster as usual. Suddenly, something whooshed past its head, moving so fast that its afterimage remained. Norbert was enraged. In the box, besides its two owners, Ralph and Sherry, it was the strongest being. Who dared fly over its head? Norbert immediately turned and chased after the streak of light, but it was already far behind. Passing through a desert, Ralph saw a roaring, churning cloud floating in the sky, filled with boundless lightning. He rode his fire arrow and plunged into the cloud, quickly finding Sherry within its thick embrace. Sherry was standing on the back of a thunderbird, preening its beautiful, golden tail feathers. Hearing the whooshing sound, the girl turned and saw Ralph, riding his fire arrow, suddenly hover in midair, then slowly glide away, matching the thunderbird's speed. The thunderbird, named Mirasis by Ralph, let out a joyful cry upon seeing the boy. Ralph reached out and stroked Mirasis's head, calming its agitated state. The boy had rescued this thunderbird from two dark wizards attempting to steal the feathered serpent's egg during summer vacation in an Indian tribe. The system had issued a quest to help heal the thunderbird's injuries, with a reward magic being Thunderous Strike. The thunderbird's injuries weren't just physical, but also psychological. It had been tormented for a long time. Newt was an expert at healing animal psychological trauma, and after 6 months of treatment, the thunderbird was almost completely healed. Hearing the bell that controlled it no longer evoked the same conditioned fear from its heart. Ralph took a handful of mealworms from his pocket. Mirasis opened its mouth, and the boy put the mealworms in, which it chewed greedily. Sherry held a few shed thunderbird tail feathers in her hand, intending to take them back to make bookmarks. She asked, "How's this firebolt?" "Very good," Ralph said with satisfaction. "Much better than my broom." "Someone didn't say that before." Sherry cleared her throat, mimicking Ralph's words. "The firebolt is impractical, not much better than my broom, a complete waste of money. Anyone who buys it is a sucker." Ralph chuckled. He suddenly realized Sherry had a talent for acting, especially in her expressions and tone. Her imitations were quite lifelike. "So serious is the sucker?" "I'm not." Ralph shook his head. "He bought the broom." "Not me, but someone also said." Sherry mimicked Ralph's tone vividly. "The firebolts arrived and are just sitting in the warehouse. I won't even glance at them." Ralph chuckled shamelessly. "I've said so much, how come you only remember these few?" "I remember everything you've said." The girl with the ponytail smiled brightly, tilting her head proudly. "So whatever you've said to me, don't even think about going back on your word." "I remember everything. I'm not one to break my promise." Ralph beckoned with his finger and laughed. "Hurry up and get on. I'll show you the speed of the firebolts." Sherry nodded, stepped forward, and straddled the broom. Ralph had already added a cushion, so there was no problem. The boy flicked the firebolts, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. He chose a spot at the bottom of the cloud sea, as neat as if it had been cut by a knife, and submerged his head in the cloud sea. Ralph and Shirley swung their arms, rising and falling like two swans swimming. Shirley laughed happily. "It's so fast, it can go even faster." Ralph rode the firebolt, straight as a line, soaring into the sky. After reaching its highest point, it plummeted from 100 meters in the air. Only when it was about 2 or 3 meters above the ground did it suddenly gain altitude, flying close to the ground and gracefully disappearing into the distance. Before, Ralph had tried to turn at a height of 3 or 4 meters with his broom, only to crash headfirst into the ground, broom and all. But riding the firebolt, with someone on his back, Ralph easily completed the difficult landski feint. This shows that, just like fishing, sometimes it's not that your skills are lacking, but your equipment. Replace it with the most expensive one. We won't suffer that humiliation. Ralph didn't fly towards the open sky again, but stayed close to the ground, circling among the hills. Each time the firebolt slowed down, Shirley would bump into the boy's back. After several bumps, she rubbed her body, her pretty face slightly flushed, and said, "Ralph, slow down, don't crash into the rocks." Feeling the soft push from behind, Ralph suppressed a laugh and assured her, "I won't. Trust my skills. I've practiced hard for 10 years, my riding skills are already perfected. If you're scared, just hug me from behind. There's a winding road ahead, don't fall off." The girl with the ponytail bit her thin lips. She secretly glanced at Ralph's profile, and after a moment, finally mustered her courage and reached out to hug his waist. Shirley didn't look at the distant scenery anymore, but gently pressed her burning cheek against Rob's back. She could feel her heart pounding, but she didn't know whose heart it was. "What are you laughing at?" Shirley suddenly asked. "I'm not laughing," Rob denied immediately. The blushing ponytail girl released Rove, raising her little fist and waving it, saying, "You definitely laughed just now." The pace slowed again, and Shirley quickly hugged Rove. He couldn't hold back his laughter any longer. At the foot of the mountain, Aragog, who was sleeping in, was awakened. Looking up at this scene, it thought to itself, "Are these two crazy?" End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.